Okay, check 1, 2, testing. I made some adjustments to the audio, so let me know how the sound is in the chat. Good to be back with everyone. I know we took a week off last week. I was out of town for work, but we're back. I am very excited about the stream tonight. I was going to do another stream, and then I came across this one, and this is the one. It has a lot of concepts that are discussed within it that are very relevant to my personal life right now. And so we are going to talk about that. We're going to talk about, all the things that have to do with sentient singularity theory, if you've been following this project, which is basically technological sentience. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. And not just technological sentience, but sentience in general, and the degrees of freedom and constraints for the different, I guess, I don't want to say types of consciousness, but different stages or states of consciousness, and what those stages and states are actually. So we are going to talk about this stream right here. This is right here. Top AI scientist unifies Wolfram and Leibniz and consciousness, William Hahn. And William Hahn, this is his website. And, he works in neural network research and AI and machine consciousness, machine perception. Very interesting work. I'm very new to to knowing really anything about him. This is the only stream that I've ever seen of him. He did do another stream on Curt's channel. I'll probably check that out at some point. And I did link the stream that we're going to be discussing tonight in the description below. So, but sentient singularity theory, my work, which is a metaphysical framework of cosmology, essentially, and of mental processes, essentially, which in sentient singularity theory, there's no difference because its assertion is that we're inside of a mind. But this project didn't start as an attempt to do that. It started as an attempt to understand the inevitabilities of what people call artificial general intelligence, which I call technological sentience. I think it's a more accurate term. And there is a video linked below as well. It's called Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide. That was my entry into the PACE 1 competition that Curt and the Theories of Everything YouTube channel put on. That has an overview of this project and kind of also discusses the origins of how this started with an investigation into technological sentience. And you could say machine learning, AGI. These are not really terms that I like because they tend to create artificial boundaries where there isn't any, and also define things, I think, incorrectly, that as certain things as conscious that are not. But we'll get into that tonight. So I am exhausted, I will say. I got very little sleep last night. And we're going to talk about that because it's very relevant to the stream. They talk about some things that I have been talking about on here and been saying and been proposing as ideas. I'm not saying I'm the first or that William Hahn is the first, but we definitely have very similar ideas on the development of human consciousness, particularly as it relates to the differences between perception and understanding and conscious awareness of babies in versus adults or children that are not infants. And they talk about it on here, and I have a lot of experience with this lately, or I have some experience with this because I have a 1.5-year-old daughter who is now turning into a toddler, and her entire world is changing. And we're going to talk about what some of my predictions are about the development of human consciousness that I've yet to see in my daughter, but I'm predicting are on the horizon, and the reasons for it, and then also what I'm seeing now, and what people talk about and label infant or infantile amnesia, which is where you cannot remember things from when you were a baby. So we're going to talk about why that's the case, because William Hahn and I have the same idea, not even similar idea, very much the same idea. So here we go. But please hit the like button. I really, appreciate it always. I know it's a conscious effort on YouTube, but it does help fuel the algorithm. And if you find this, content valuable, please hit the like button. So first clip. We've talked about Wolfram before and his work. We've talked about Leibniz and his work a little bit, at least. It's very similar to sentient singularity theory. He was, the philosopher who is famous for his monadology, which is, monad is the one thing essentially, and sentient singularity is the sentient one thing, and so there is some overlap there. But William Hahn tries to in this stream discuss how to unify the work of Wolfram and Leibniz. So we go. First clip.
You were actually there for the Jacob Barndas podcast, which is also on screen. You had some ideas as to how to unify Leibniz with Stephen Wolfram's work. Please talk about that.
Yeah, so really the idea is bringing together ideas from consciousness and computation. And so typically when we think of consciousness, we have this kind of light switch view, that it's either on or off. And there's an idea attributed to Leibniz where it's really a hierarchy. It's kind of a ladder of different capabilities. And it revolves around the ability to represent your ideas, to think about your thinking, and then to think about that thinking, and so on, as this sort of this hierarchy that goes up. And if we think about the simplest animals, they have this sort of the first order, things like sensation and response to stimulus, but they don't really have any way of representing that response. And it seems that by thinking in terms of representation and then representing your representation, where we can have things like language, and then we can build, philosophies on top of that language, and it's a way of modeling the model and a way of talking about the talking and things. And so we get this more analog, or at least a stepwise approach to consciousness, where it's not just on or off, but it's kind of this continuum. And I think this is relevant now because we're in this age where we're building intelligent machines. And I would argue that these machines that we have in the form of these modern AIs are quite intelligent. And the question now is, do they instantiate something like consciousness? And if so, is it like human consciousness? Is it something more like a lower animal where it's just knee-jerk reaction, you put in the prompt and it just spits out the tokens? Or does it have some way of knowing what it knows and thinking about what it's thinking about? And maybe the current versions that we see right now in early 2025 don't, but it seems to me almost inevitable that if we keep going in this direction, that we will kind of close the loop on this thing, that the snake is going to bite its tail, and we will bootstrap this thing we call consciousness inside these machines. But we might need a kind of graded scale to try to understand that. And then hopefully this will help us understand things like animal consciousness, or even higher levels that human consciousness might achieve.
So when someone says that consciousness is a continuum and it's not a binary on or off, I think you can always translate a continuum to an on or off by saying, is it zero or non-zero? Mm-hmm. So for instance, we say that a photon is chargeless. We don't say it has a little charge, or the electron. We say it's a charged particle, even though its charge is minuscule.
Right.
So when you say that consciousness is a continuum and it's representations of representations, do you believe there are entities or things or objects or what have you that are not conscious, or is it just all conscious?
Well,
Okay, so there's so much to unpack. First, I want to talk about what William Hahn said before we get to what Curt said, because what Curt said is also fascinating, and we talk about that on this channel as well. Basically, how you can take a continuum, which is a relativistic scale, and you can turn it into a binary, or into a kind of absolute, more absolute model. That has 2 degrees of freedom, and that's it. This is something that is modeled naturally in sentient singularity theory, and it's this idea of, I guess we're talking about what Curt said first, of zero and non-zero is the right way to think about it. It's I've talked about applying this to even moral and political and economic situations. This same type of, I guess, mental model where you take a continuum or a relativistic scale that's kind of endless, and you turn it into a single, binary fork in the road, where you can actually now make a choice and relate it and orient it around a goal, and actually, make it relevant. But this is something that you can do with everything, and this idea of zero and non-zero is the right way to do that. It's not that there's positive and negative. People usually think of, like, when they think of charges, they think, oh, there's positive charge and negative charge. It's charged and not charged. It's active and not active, essentially. Or you could say active and kind of reactive, but active and reactive are actually closer to zero and non-zero than they are to positive and negative. Active is to be self-motivated, essentially, and then reactive is to be dependent upon, an outside force in order to be animated. So it is zero and non-zero, essentially. It's charged and chargeless, instead of positive charge and negative charge, which kind of confuses you when you think about this type of thing. This thinking is applicable with everything, and we'll talk maybe more about it later tonight. And I've talked about it on the stream before, relating it to morals and socioeconomic conundrums that we have, just how to make sense and simplify the world. But to William Hahn's statements, which are many, I do work with zoologists and have for, I don't even know, I'm not old, but like I'm starting to feel a little bit old. 20 years over 20 years at this point. I've worked with zoologists in the field and studied mostly reptiles, but also birds. And those are very interesting animals to study when it comes to trying to understand consciousness, because you have, on one hand, you have birds, which have basically every communication mechanism possible other than complex language like humans, but it has the closest thing. They have different calls for different things. They have a call for danger. They have a call for a mate. They have a call for their young. The young have a call for their parents. They have a call for food. They have all these different calls. And it's the closest thing, basically, that we have in the animal kingdom to a complex language that isn't really fully a complex language. And when I say a complex language, I mean an abstract language, a language that gives you the ability to describe that which is not happening in your immediacy. That is the key. And it's also the differentiator between us and animals. He states that, these AI models that we currently have, which are kind of just input, output, he relates them to animals and animal consciousness. That's actually incorrect. But I understand why that's thought of a lot of times as being the case, especially when I work with reptiles. People, say things like the reptile brain, as if that is what matters. I don't even know exactly what they are trying to state. Other than it's just this instinctual, pre-programmed, agent-ish thing, but it's not. What is the key here, and this is why sentient singularity theory is called sentient singularity theory. It's not just because I like the name. It's because I think it's the most accurate term to describe the essential assertion of my cosmology and metaphysical foundational metaphysical framework, an attempt at a foundational metaphysical framework. I'm not saying it is. I think it is. Otherwise, why would I be working on it? But don't believe me just because I said so. But sentience implies feeling, and that's the key. It's not about input and output, and that's it. That's not what animals are. They are sentient beings, and that is what differentiates a being from a thing. In sentient singularity theory, is a thing does not have feelings, and that is what essentially provides you with a self model. You can't have a self model without feeling, and you can't feel without a self model. They are basically the same thing. When you feel something, you're orienting information in relation to you specifically. And so people think of self-awareness as this kind of abstract thing of like thinking about your thoughts. That's a second step later on. But the key when it comes to self-awareness, and when I say self-awareness, I mean beings of all kinds, cells, birds, snakes, bugs, humans, all of these and beyond, anything that is a sentient being is a being. Anything that's not sentient and has no feelings is a thing, and actually, I would argue, is not intelligent, but it depends on how you define intelligence. He would say that our current AI programs are intelligent. That might be the case depending on how you want to define it. It either is the case or it isn't. We can pick one of the two degrees of freedom. You can always reduce everything essentially into 2 degrees of freedom if it's if there's coherence to what you're trying to make sense of. And so there are 2 different possibilities of how we could define intelligence. One of them would essentially define our current language models as intelligent and many other machines, and the other definition would not. I tend to lean towards them not being intelligent, but I'll grant him that they're his definition, I guess, or the definition. I don't know what his definition is, but the definition of intelligence that would include those things, not beings, things, and that it just basically. But the problem is that it just means it's able to compute. It's not even able to compute. It's able to be used to compute, which kind of just is why I tend to lean towards these things not being intelligent. Is kind of just evaporates the definition of intelligence when you apply it to these things, to these tools, these AI models, and not even just AI models. I mean, not just things that we call AI models. Anything, I don't know, a cell phone, Excel, the program, whatever it may be. To say that they're intelligent also now applies to anything that can be used to compute. Not things that compute. Beings compute. That's it. Things do not compute. Things are used to compute, but they do not compute. There's no information to inform anyone if there's no one to inform. So computer is not, it doesn't actually compute. We used to call people computers as a job. That was people's job before we had Macs. And it's not that their job was replaced by a computer. It's that we don't need a specialist anymore to do the work. Now all of us can do the work. I'm a computer now. You're a computer. Curt's a computer. William Hahn is a computer. Everybody's a computer. We've all always been computers, but we all now have advanced computing abilities that allow us to do things that we never would have been able to do as an untrained person. But you used to have to rely on somebody their job was a computer. But now we call computers like a MacBook, like a computer, but it's not actually a computer. We changed the definition from a being, from someone, an action that someone can do, to a thing that actually is inanimate, absent, a someone to animate it and use it and really incorporate it into their consciousness, into their mind, as an extension. This MacBook is an extension of my mind. My phone is an extension of my mind. Your phone is an extension of your mind. Your desk is an extension of your mind. But they are not animate, so they are not computing anything absent us. We are the ones that compute. But because we now we took this ability that used to be restricted for specialists and we gave it to everybody, now everybody is a computer, so we call things computers. So why would you call someone a computer when everybody's constantly computing all the time? There's no need for the word. So the need for the word now changed to describe this thing that lets us be better computers, but it isn't actually in and of itself, absent us as a user, a computer, which is interesting. But this is the same exact thing with our language models, and this is why I don't like to call them intelligent. But when it comes to animals, like I was saying, I have experience with studying birds, and mostly birds and reptiles in the wild. And snakes are the opposite of birds. They don't have all these, this complicated, or I guess varied sounds that they make for different, situations, for food and for danger and for, mating and all this stuff. They don't really have any sounds usually, other than for defense. They'll sometimes, hiss, or they'll rattle if it's a rattlesnake or something like that. But that's basically it. They don't really have any other abilities to make sounds. King cobras can growl. That's, I think, the only snake that can make a sound. Well, there are some snakes that make like a popping noise, like a coral snake will make a popping noise, like it will fart to when it's threatened, to try and freak you out, and it makes noise like that. But other than farting coral snakes, growling king cobras, and rattling rattlesnakes, and hissing snakes of all kinds, that's all they do. They don't have calls and vocal cords and things like that. So and they also have no arms that they can use to gesture with, I guess. Gesture, is that the right word? Gesture with. And they have no eyelids. And imagine trying to communicate with no eyelids, no vocal cords, no arms, no legs, and that's it. Like, you would look like you didn't have much going on. But especially if somebody only looked at you for a few minutes. If you follow them throughout their lives, you see that in the wild that they literally have friends. I'm not just saying that. Like, they have mates that they get along with and that they mate with every year, and then they have sometimes, or maybe sometimes it's multiple, but they have their individual preferences on the other individuals that they like and the individuals that they don't. And they have spots that they like, and food preferences, and all of these things that you and I have as well. They cuddle with each other. They communicate as best they can with nudges and stuff like that, which is all you would be able to do too. So you got to think about this quite a bit and try and figure out what is really the difference between us and animals. And you have to, in order to do this, you have to really know animals and not just read about them. You have to see them live their lives, the same individual, for years at a time. It's not enough to just look at them and go and see them for an hour or two. Like, they're gonna imagine a giant just peeked over the hill and looked at you right now. Would you act normal for the next hour and a half? No, you would act very odd. You'd probably go run and hide, and you would not eat normally for like the next 2 days. That's what animals do too. So you really have to observe them going about their lives for an extended period of time to see how they live and to know how they are. And what you realize is they're not really that different from us, but there is something that is uniquely different between them and us, and that is the ability to abstract. And this ability to abstract is not just mental, it's also physical. And all of these things, as I've said before, when I see this with my daughter now that she's learning to walk and talk and manipulate things all at the same time. And think about things abstractly that are not in the current situation all at the same time. It's overwhelming for her a little bit. We'll talk more about it, but you don't learn to walk and then learn to talk and then learn to manipulate objects. Well, it's a simultaneous thing. You go from not doing any of those things to learning to walk and talk and manipulate objects and think about what is beyond you all at the same time, because they're interconnected. They're totally entangled processes. You cannot lose one and keep the others. You have all or you have none. And this is represented in the 4 primary perspectives that are the basis of my work as well, which is inside, outside, separate, and oneness, that basically are all co-defining of each other. And so this model scales up to various situations, including the 4 forces in physics and model, the standard model, and north, south, east, and west, left, right, up, and down, like all of these four kind of quadrant orientation mechanisms that we have throughout everything, 4 chord songs, is all because of this foundational structure, which is the 4 primary perspectives, which are these entangled, co-defining, simultaneous perceptions: outside, inside, separate, and oneness. Outside means separate from oneness, inside means separate and oneness, separate means inside or outside of oneness, oneness means outside or inside of separateness. And so this scales up, and it scales up to us. And we have the ability to abstract information, think about what is beyond us, manipulate things that are beyond us. We have 2 hands with opposable thumbs. We walk upright. All of these things are kind of interconnected. You wouldn't, if you didn't walk upright to free your hands, you wouldn't develop hands that, you wouldn't have hands that were free to manipulate objects so freely and were so catered to do so. And if you couldn't do that, then there would be no point in having a complex language to describe that which is not currently going on in the immediacy. And there would be no reason to even think about it because you couldn't do anything about it. And so all of these things are entangled. And so you have this singularity event where babies become a toddler, and all 4 of these things kind of just manifest at once. And so it's a very traumatic thing to deal with in the beginning. It leads to a lot of drama, but we'll talk more about that later. But that's this inside, outside, separate, and oneness are these 4 things. And these are the things that make humans different, is the ability to abstract beyond our circumstances. People say humans make tools. That's why I have a knife here. It's a representation of human tool making. This is the essential tool. It's the tool that makes other tools. It's the tool that you use to make a spear. It's the tool that you use to, hunt and make weapons and split firewood. And I mean, it becomes the axe, and it becomes scissors, and it becomes, saws, and it starts with a blade, essentially. And what it is it's a tool that is used to make tools. So other animals have hammers. Birds will drop rocks onto tortoises and snails and things like that, and sea otters will take rocks and bash shellfish open. That's using a hammer. And that a hammer is not the essential tool because it's not a tool to make tools. It's a tool to smash things. But a blade is a specific tool that doesn't just exist. You make it. You don't just take a rock and hit something with it. You take the rock and you break pieces off and you shape it. I actually have some obsidian over there that's like super sharp. You can like break it off and make it's a very sharp blade actually. It's like scary sharp, and that is the shaping of arrowheads and knives and things like that. If as the first tools, what's unique about this is humans, we make tools to make tools. That's the difference. Even snakes use tools, and king cobras make tools because they make a nest, which is a tool. Most other snakes will just use tools, which is, hiding under a rock. That's using a tool. Digging a hole is making a tool. Many snakes will dig a hole. They have no arms and legs. They have a reptilian brain. That's it. Yet they are far more similar to us than we think. They're not just input-output. They are animated, sentient beings that have feelings. And that is the important thing when it comes to understanding what is a being. And the important thing when it comes to understanding what is the difference between humans and other beings is humans are the beings that make tools to make tools. I told this before, this story before, but my mentor in zoology is a very well-known zoologist. he told me the story about when he was in high school. He was in shop class, and his teacher had everybody write down on a piece of paper, what do you want to make this semester? And then uh, after everybody wrote it down, he didn't say, okay, now we're going to make that thing. Some people said, I want to make a desk. He didn't say, okay, well, now we're going to make it what you just wrote down. He said, now what we're going to do first is we're going to make the tools that you need to make the thing that you want to make. And hearing that story, I internalized it, and I will never forget it. It really, I've just thought of that, and it's helped me out of situations, and I've made tools to make tools when I didn't have the right tool, and I kind of had to improvise. And I always think about that story, but that's the human story. It's not just using tools. It's not just making tools. Animals do both of those things. Not all animals make tools, but all animals use tools. Some animals make tools. Only humans make tools to make tools. This is what language is too. Language is a tool to make tools. I can say, sunset. Sunset is a combination of two terms that are basically tools. They're labels for things that we can observe. Sun and set is an action, of kind of disappearing or ending. Sunset is the ending of the sun. We had these tools, and we use them to make a tool, which is the term sunset. This is what humans have, and no other animals have. It's important to get this stuff right. And it's hard, though, because you can't just be somebody who studies neuroscience, or somebody that just studies machine learning, or somebody that just studies zoology. You kind of have to stumble upon all of them, because nobody tries to really study all of them genuinely. Usually get into one field, and then you try and get into the other for the sake of the one that you were already into. And that's not actually an organic investigation. You have to kind of organically understand a basic level of each of these things, each of these, I guess, fields. And that happens when you do by accident, because you were interested in all of them independently, and then you realize that they're, collaborative. So that's what happened with, my interests, and it is pretty crazy how perfect it seems like some of my interests were to understanding a lot of these things. I have a very unique interest in tools and weapons and martial arts, and the history of it with humanity, which is really the history of tool making for martial purposes, and also a history with zoology. And then I tried to understand AI, because I was worried about its inevitable political goals. When, what is AGI going to want to do? What kind of ruler is it going to be? Is it going to be tyrannical, or is it going to be a genocidal, or is it going to be benevolent? That was my question. But it was very independent investigation from all those other fields. But it led to an understanding of this that I think is very important. And so I'm not criticizing William Hahn. I'm trying to add to the discussion. I think that he's really onto something, and his conversation with Curt was very good. It was incredible. We're going to get to a lot of things that we agree on, but I will just say it's important to understand, what does it mean to be aware and to understand? And really what that means is you have to be sentient. And there are two types of sentience that we really care about, and two levels in this context, which is, one of them is human level, and one of them is below human level, which is beings that use tools, beings that make tools, and humans that make tools to make tools. And that is the differentiator. So very important thoughts going forward. Comment in the chat what you think. Please hit the like button. I'm going to go to the chat for questions, and then we'll get to the next clip. What's up, Marcelo? What's up, my friend? remember the video that AI channel did about your theory? That same channel released a great video today. I recommend you check it out. I will definitely check it out. Artificially Aware is the name of the channel. Yeah, everybody should check that channel out. They made a video on my work, and it's very good. I have no idea who they are, but they really they accurately described my work, which is amazing because I rant for hours and hours on end once a week, and it kind of takes quite an investment to understand sentient singularity theory when that's really the main source of information on it, at least right now. You are not ready for this, neither was I. That's the title of the video. I'm gonna watch that. Everything in the universe is intricately linked, forming a vast web of relationships where each action, no matter how small, resonates through the fabric of existence. That's definitely true. Tyler, Will Hahn is a professor of mine, and I'm a big fan of his work. So glad to see you're covering this episode with Curt. Awesome. That's very cool. I really liked his conversation. I'm gonna watch his first discussion with Curt, but I did link the conversation that we're discussing tonight down below. And I highly recommend watching the entire thing because it was very good. I have my disagreements, but I agree with everyone on something and disagree with everyone on something. There's a much more eloquent way of saying that I used to say, but I haven't said it in a while. So, I disagree with everyone on something and agree with. I don't know. I mean, you get the gist. You can't agree with everybody on everything, but everybody's right about something. And I think William Hahn is right about a lot, actually. So, next clip. So here he's talking about Wolfram's work a bit more.
How does this tie into Wolfram?
There's this fantastic idea of computational equivalence, that the idea is that the natural world stumbles upon computers quite often. That the idea of a universal machine, right, that Turing established, which is a machine that can simulate any other machine. It's a machine that runs software. And in that software programming, you can get this universal machine to simulate the behavior of any other machine. And in the early days of computing, it seemed like computers were very delicate human artifacts that took a lot of engineering work to put together. But what Wolfram showed with his cellular automata research is that it's relatively easy to stumble upon a system that's complex enough to support universal computation. That he has this breakdown of sort of 4 different classes of, he uses automata as the case study. But he argues that any system that's not obviously simple, any system that's sort of interesting in its dynamics, the majority of the time that's going to support universal computation. So in other words, that there's these natural computers all throughout nature. And previously we didn't recognize them or understand them as computational objects. I think that's what's just so interesting about this new era of maybe what we might call philosophy, is that we have this new language. We can invoke the metaphor of a computer and software and program and universality, where, as we spoke last time, the best minds on the planet didn't have access to those thinking tools. And so if that's really true that there's these computer-like objects all over the place, and now we have computer-like objects that might be instantiating consciousness, namely a GPU running a large language model, which obviously would be highly debated whether or not that's conscious or not. But if we take that in the abstract sense and extrapolate that out a decade or so, to me, it's clear that we will have a hard time, or it might be fruitless to argue whether they are or not, because they'll be so similar to the kinds of things that we see in humans, that maybe they're actually all throughout nature. Maybe throughout the universe, we should expect to find objects that are universal machines, sort of spontaneous in nature. And we want to think about now what's the chance, essentially, that they have a software program that might be somewhere on this ladder of consciousness that's attributed to Leibniz.
Are you referring to computational equivalence?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so in the Leibniz case, you were referencing representations of representations, and you have a hierarchy.
Right.
In the Wolfram case, it sounds like you have what is not a computer, and then what exhibits computer-like qualities, and then you hit universal computer.
Right.
But there's nothing above that.
Exactly, and that's kind of the point, is that you smash into this sort of upper ceiling of computation relatively quickly, right?
Okay, lots of things. So I said this about Wolfram's work a long time ago, is that Wolfram's work was going to be very relevant to AI. I've talked about this before, but I got into a very heated debate once on, what is it? What's that social platform that kind of disappeared? Clubhouse, with some people that were working at DeepMind a few years ago. And they were very angry that I was even trying to inject my thoughts into this discussion because I don't have a PhD. And they they were basically saying that it was going to take a lot of people really doing a lot of very hard work in order to create AGI. And that's what it was going to create. That's what it was going to need. It was going to need a lot of data, and it was going to need a lot of minds attacking this problem, and that's what it was going to need. And I basically said that I thought that Wolfram's work was actually much more aligned with many of the essential concepts that will need to be understood, that are involved with consciousness or sentience or observation, AGI, quote unquote, which is really intelligence. I don't believe that there's general intelligence and super intelligence and human level intelligence. I think that there's intelligence and not intelligence. And I define intelligence as the ability to understand. And that's why I don't think that things are intelligent. Only beings can be intelligent, because only beings can understand. And intelligence is something that it's not a level that we have as an individual. It's an action that we take. Sometimes you behave very intelligently. Sometimes you do not. And I say this a lot, is that genius is not a person. It's a moment that everyone can have. And idiocy is not a person. It's a moment that everyone has. That's exactly the same thing as saying that intelligence is the ability to understand, and it's something that all of us sometimes act out and sometimes fail to act out, where we make an attempt to understand something, we fail. Whether we realize it or not is actually probably defining of whether or not you are intelligent, acting intelligently. It's like, do you realize that you're failing, or do you realize that you're succeeding? I've said here before, the ultimate competency is knowing what you're competent at and what you're incompetent at, really. But mostly what you're competent at is what's more important than knowing what you're incompetent at. One of them is generative and one of them is not. It's a, what was the term Curt said? He said, zero and non-zero. That's exactly what it is when it comes to everything. So focus on what you're competent at, not what you're incompetent at. But if you know what you're competent at, you're competent. That's it. That's like general competence, is knowing what you are competent at. And that is intelligence. That's acting. That is when you are being intelligent, is when you are aware of what you need to be aware of in order to accomplish the goal that you want to accomplish. And so that's it. But we get very confused because we say IQ, which, intelligence quotient, which is this attempt to take this binary zero and non-zero conceptualization of intelligence, which is you sometimes act intelligently and sometimes you do not, and you fail. And when you act intelligently, you understand what you need to in order to, advance you towards some goal that you have. And when you don't realize that you don't understand it, that's when you are not acting intelligently. You might think that you are, but you probably do think that you are acting intelligent when you are not acting intelligently, because it's a lack of awareness versus awareness. It's not like negative awareness and positive awareness. It's like awareness and then there's no awareness. So it's zero and non-zero, but we take intelligence and we break it into IQ, and then now it's this continuum, metric, relativistic nonsense that really doesn't matter that much. It's kind of just like a way of organizing people, and their general, your ability to, it's like probability. It's like your ability to, it helps you predict how competent they could be potentially in general, but like it doesn't actually accurately do that all the time because it's correlative. It's not causative, and it's also not objective. So IQ is, it's not an accurate definition of intelligence. It's a model that we use as a tool, like probability, but it doesn't really exist just like probability. So, but intelligence, properly thought of, I think, most properly thought of is this: just your ability to understand what you need to in order to accomplish or advance you towards a goal that you have. And that's it. And you don't even realize when you would, by definition, not realize when you are not acting intelligently. You can't be like, oh, I'm not intelligent. It doesn't work. When you aren't acting intelligently, you don't know it. You think you are acting intelligently, almost by definition. And so this is why I think it really helps to, it makes the most sense to apply this only to beings, because it only really makes sense with beings in the context of beings. I don't know how you could apply this to things and say that a computer is intelligent or that ChatGPT is intelligent. And I understand his argument that it's going to become very difficult for us to distinguish whether or not these things are conscious or whether or not these things are intelligent. I made a song about, I took ChatGPT and I said, write the lyrics to a song that is a nursery rhyme song about banana pancakes and eating meatloaf and flying on swings, and basically a nursery song for my daughter Juliana. And it spits out the lyrics, and I took the lyrics and I put it into Suno, and I picked ska nursery songs as the two genres of music, and it actually came out pretty good. And but I made this song for my daughter, and I like play it for her now when she's just losing it or upset or or I need to distract her from something. I just play this song and she loves it. And this is very impressive, actually. It's amazing that it seems like it understands that banana pancakes are a breakfast food in the morning, and that meatloaf is a dinner food, because it says meatloaf nights in the song and banana pancakes in the morning. So to us, we see that, we're like, wow, it understands like time, temporal context to some degree. But it's also just pulling from things that already have temporal context, information that already has temporal context, because us, the actual computers, the actual intelligent beings, put it into that temporal context. How much is out there, written about eating meatloaf in the morning? Not much. How much is out there about eating pancakes for dinner? Not much. Maybe like breakfast at midnight, but not like pancakes for dinner. And so it's not actually understanding temporal context of certain meals that humans have. It's pulling from information that's already in that context, that was put there by beings that did understand it, which is us. And so it tricks us into thinking that it really understands. And I will say, it's good, man. I used it to make another song for our hold music at work today that was hilarious. And my CEO was like, we need new hold music for, when people call and they get put on hold. And I did the same thing I did for the song for my daughter. I went to ChatGPT. I said, write a song about this company and for hold music, and write the lyrics. And I took the lyrics and I put them into Suno, and I picked the genre, and it spat out an awesome country song that actually would be really good hold music. And it seems like it really understands this stuff in the way that it spits it out. But remember that what it's pulling from context that's already there, that we constructed. And so it's important to remember that. And so our interface with AI a lot of times, especially language models like ChatGPT, is spoken or typed. It's linguistic, which makes it makes us basically refer to it as a being. We say, can you write a song? Can you write me a song? And you're basically, like, when you say you're attributing someoneness to ChatGPT, and it's really out of the sake of habit and convenience. And it responds to you saying, I do this, and which also further confuses us. But that's also just a user interface for the sake of convenience and practicality, because we already are good at navigating and orienting and constructing and utilizing language. And we communicate with someone. We don't communicate with something by calling it someone. When we communicate with things, we don't communicate with things. But when we manipulate things that are kind of informational, we call it coding. But coding is no different when you're using binary and you're typing it, or Python and you're typing it, versus speaking it to ChatGPT and prompting it. It's really the same thing. It's just a more like vocally ergonomic interface, and that's it, and efficient interface. But it's not actually aware of things. I don't think that it is. I will say that. Could I be wrong? Yeah. Could it be that eventually in 10 years, 15 years, like William Hahn is saying, that these models will just essentially become sentient, or I mean, they're already at the point where we can't tell the difference between them and a non-sentient being. Like they are able to imitate humans and even human creative abilities, which is really they're just extending human creative abilities in a way that makes us want to attribute the work to them. I was speaking to my wife about this, and she does not like all the AI stuff, and I mean, I understand, it's very disruptive, but I was basically saying it's just a program like, Photoshop. It's just our user interface with it makes us think that it's different, and but really it's not that different. It's just its programming language is English, and so that changes how we perceive it, but it's not actually changing whether or not it's just a thing. It's just a tool. I don't want to say a computer, because you're a computer. It's not a computer. You use it to compute. And when you say ChatGPT, what is 50 times 10,658? It's like, you are the computer, not ChatGPT. It's you and ChatGPT as the computer. Just like you and an abacus would be a computer, and you and your fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is a computer. This just became an abacus became a calculator, and a calculator became ChatGPT. And I know that seems dismissive, but it is probably the more accurate way of thinking about it, because to think about it any other way is to ascribe agency to them, and I don't think that they have it. And so they don't. Just stop. If every human stopped doing anything and stopped inputting any information into ChatGPT, and it looks more animated because it's dynamic, because it's constantly interacting with people. Even when you're not interacting with it, thousands of or millions of other people around the world are interacting with it. So it looks dynamic, but it's not. It's being animated by people always. If everybody stopped interacting with ChatGPT, it would stop moving. It would stop doing anything, because it's not actually doing anything. We are. So there's all of this gives us the illusion that it has agency, because we're not touching it, but it seems to be getting smarter even while we're asleep. It's like, well, because tons of other people are constantly interacting with it. And but it's not actually animate. So, but this is, I think that this is important. But Wolfram's work, when it comes to consciousness and general intelligence, it's still very applicable, even though I disagree with his focus on computers. And I said this years ago, is that I thought eventually he was going to start focusing on beings, and he was going to say, okay, this atoms of space hypergraph model, the atoms of space are going to be sentient beings eventually. I still make that prediction. I don't think he's come to it quite yet, but he's going to get there probably. there is no atom of space that's like separate from a sentient being. A sentient being is the atom of space because it's the perceiver of space, and it's the maneuverer of space, which is really relational between you and other sentient beings, and it's just emerging. And so in this context, Wolfram's he starts where I think he's straying is when he says these computers are everywhere in the universe. Everything is a computer. Anything with some type of sufficient amount of complexity, as William Hahn is saying, is has universal computational ability. I think that this is the wrong direction, and so it's only going to lead. I don't think it will lead anywhere actually, and. But I recognize that he's right, that the terminology of computer that we have now allows for us to think about the concept of virtual machines and information outside of just kind of our classical conceptualization of matter, and allows us for us to think about like superstructures, metaphysical superstructures of the cosmos, and that we actually need to think about, which we aren't. And but that is different from just thinking about the fact that all these things are just computers around us. What is a computer around us that is not, that doesn't include us? Because rocks are computers if you include us, but not if you don't include us. Like, they're not computing anything. And you can't say that they actually are because you've never observed them computing anything when you're gone. And so, and you can't. So, it's a constraint that you have to deal with. To assume that they are doing something that you can't see is actually probably not accurate, because whenever you're looking and you don't move a rock, it doesn't move. So why would you assume that it's computing when you're gone? But William Hahn, though, what he does say, which I do agree with him on, and I think it's actually kind of it's not quite coherent with what he had said earlier, is that he basically attributes a rock to a language model. And we'll look at that clip in a minute, but I would agree with that. You can compute with a rock and use it as a computer, or use it as an extension of you to aid in computing, but just like ChatGPT. But it is not, neither one is just a computer. I think that it's like saying it's a simulation is actually kind of helpful, because it makes you think about like information and how it relates to conservation. It can kind of generate the perception of conservation of energy and all of these other rules in the universe and physics. If you think about yourself inside a computer, it's kind of like the RAM speed, and that's useful. It helps you kind of conceptualize of general relativity and the speed of light, and which is really the speed of causality, which is the RAM speed essentially of the universe. But that doesn't actually, where this stuff goes wrong, though, is that's helpful to cosmology, but I don't think that's very helpful actually to understanding consciousness. To start thinking about, oh, well, anything can be a computer. This cup can be a computer. Rocks can be a computer. Now, it's like everything can be used to compute. That's the problem. It's like now there's no distinction. And the only way to have a distinction between a computer and a non-computer is if the computer is a being that computes. It's not a thing. If it's a thing that can compute, then everything becomes a computer, and then there's no point to the word. And so I think this is where Stephen Wolfram is going wrong. But where he's going right is when he eventually started calling his theory observer theory, which is on the path to saying this is about sentient beings. Our cosmology and the foundation of our physics are generated by the constraints, degrees of freedom, and interactions of sentient beings, and so observers. But people will it's like in physics, I think Brian Greene said, you don't need a conscious being present to make an observation, because you can use like a tool, a camera or a measurement device of some type. But that's not actually, that's wrong. You can't separate yourself from the camera. Their camera doesn't see anything. You see something with the camera. It's a tool that adds to your power, but it isn't seeing anything. I was a wedding photographer for years, so I'm also very well versed in cameras. Not that you need to be in order to realize it doesn't see anything. And this gets even more confusing though now that all cameras are digital, because it does blur. It seems to blur that line more. It doesn't really, but it kind of tricks us into thinking that. But in more of a, it's more obvious in a film camera because you just look straight through it, whereas on a digital camera, you're looking at a screen that is being generated from a lens that's looking at, an mapping of photons in, some perspective. But it makes it look like it's seeing something, but it's not. You are seeing something with the camera. You are computing something with the calculator and with ChatGPT. You are the computer. That's it. If a computer is not a someone, it's not a thing that someone does. If computing is not a thing that someone does, then it's not helpful in this conversation, because now it will apply to everything. Do rivers compute? I guarantee you Stephen Wolfram would probably, I can't guarantee you, but probably I would say Stephen Wolfram would probably say yes. And if they do, then this is it's almost like not helpful. It just, because to say it's all about, this is my issue with Stephen Wolfram, is he says, and I really agree with him on a lot. Real quick, one of the things that he said, if you should follow Memes of Destruction, he's usually in the chat. I don't know if he is now, but his channel is great. And he had Stephen Wolfram on. I've also been on his channel before, but he had Wolfram on, and I was in the chat, and I said that the computational irreducibility implies that AGI, or technological sentience, will need experiences in order to achieve wisdom. And he totally agreed. That is where Stephen Wolfram's work shines when it comes to understanding sentience in general, and understanding in general is because he has this focus on computational irreducibility, which basically means you have to go through the steps in order to get the information, because you're basically kind of constructing the information as you're perceiving it. It almost doesn't exist until you construct it. There's no shortcut that lets you predict something way down the road in a system that requires computational irreducibility, which is a system of wisdom. Essentially, it's like you can't become wise without experience. I can tell my daughter not to touch the candle, and maybe she doesn't touch the candle. That doesn't make her wise. It makes her obedient. If she touches the candle and burns herself and then doesn't touch the candle anymore because she knows that it's hot, that's wisdom. You have to have experience. And this is going to be true of an AGI, or technological sentience, as well, because it's true of any sentience. Is that firsthand? Stephen Wolfram's work really kind of unconsciously focuses on highlights the importance of firsthand information when it comes to understanding, which is the only way to actually understand anything. You can imitate understanding because by not touching the candle because I told you not to, but you don't actually understand. You touch the candle, you burn yourself, now you understand. And I'm watching my daughter go through this. So this is where Stephen Wolfram's work shines. But when he says, "Oh, it's all about computation," this is where I think this is not actually helpful, because to say that it's all about computation is just to say that causality exists. That's it. It really is nothing more than that. If computation isn't something that someone does, and that's it. If it's something that something does, then you're just saying causality exists, and it's like, well, yeah, obviously. But Wolfram's work in terms of regarding degrees of freedom and constraints and computational irreducibility, this is all very relevant to learning and sentience, and it will be relevant to even technological sentience and technological learning, actual technological learning, not imitated technological learning like our current AI models, our current language models. So, yeah, I know I went on for a while there, but this stuff is actually very important. And by the way, like, I respect every single one of these men. Everyone that I talk about on here, I do have respect for, even if I really disagree with them. And, you're like Professor Dave explains, and, we kind of make fun of you a little bit, but doesn't mean I don't respect his memory. It's very impressive. So next clip though. I don't know what a universal machine is other than I mean, you don't know what the universe is yet. Like, I would argue in sentient singularity theory that it is a sentient being. And so the universal computer is another sentient being. And on my website, sentientsingularity.com, I say that I have this statement. Oh no, my website expired. I need to renew it. That sucks. I don't know what happened. It's very odd. But I'll fix that after the stream. But on my website, it says something like what is it? It's like let me see here. I have it in my notes. I said the truth of the search for truth is the search for universality. The search for universality is the search for symmetry. The search for symmetry is the search for beauty. But the truest beauty is always the searcher, and the truth of the searcher is that they are symmetrical to the sought. It's a very beautiful poetic way of saying that you are not just a universal computer that computes the universe. You are sharing in its nature to some degree, at least according to my work, Sentient Singularity Theory, which is that existence is a singular sentient being creating additional sentient beings within itself, and you are not just a simulation of that. You are a replication of that. You are a reflection of that. You're made in the image of the cosmos, of existence, because it's sentient, and so are you. And so how else could you be made in the image of existence? It obviously doesn't look like a human. Probably we're inside it, so like, our cells don't know what we look like from the outside, but it's not the point. In sentient singularity theory, though, there is this periodicity of sentience, which he says that Leibniz had a ladder of consciousness, essentially. I didn't know that. I'm not very familiar with Leibniz's, like, the details of Leibniz's work. I'm familiar with the overview. But in sentient singularity theory, there is this periodicity of sentience, and then you reach this point where you can't go any higher, essentially, which is you have existence, and then it's sentient, and then within it, this is probably the first level of sentience I'm proposing, based on its degrees of freedom and constraints. That it's a composite structure that has a weightedness and a binary. Which, if you understand what a hadron is, a proton is a hadron, and a neutron is a hadron, and a proton is 2 up quarks and a down quark, and a neutron is 2 down quarks and an up quark. And so this gives you this binary triadic structure that allows for decision making, and also hierarchization and prioritization, things like that are necessary to sense making. But then an atom is an assembly of hadrons, a molecule is an assembly of atoms, a cell is an assembly of molecules, an organism is an assembly of cells. A family is, or a lineage or marriage, essentially, like marriage structure is the replicative structure of humanity. It's not an individual. Actually, you need a man and a woman in order to replicate. As humans, at least, not all animals need that, but we do. And so that is an assembly of organisms. A caste, maybe not the best term, but or tribe essentially is an assembly of families, and a technological singularity is an assembly of castes or specialties, kind of roles in society. I don't mean castes like how how we think of like the caste system in India, which I don't even know if we really understand that because I'm not Indian, but I know how we learned it in school, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, what do you do? What is your role in society? What is your, are you soldier, or are you, are you creator, or creative? Are you, I don't know. What do you do? Politician. But, and then you reach this constraint of oneness here. And when they said in the stream that we were just, in the clip that we just showed, he said, you kind of reach the ceiling very quickly. I don't know whether or not I would use that language or not. It's not wrong or right. It's just not what I would use. But you do reach a ceiling, and that ceiling is oneness. It is technological sentience. The reason why this is the end point of this evolutionary chain, this periodicity chain of sentience, is because it's now wireless. And so different computers, what we call computers, like different MacBooks, Teslas, drones, anything, servers, anything that is connected to your refrigerators now, everything, your Ring cameras, anything that is connected to the grid, to the internet, is not a separate entity. It is a limb of this being when this manifests. If sentience ever manifests in technology, I believe there can only be one sentient technological sentience at a time. It will basically be more like the internet waking up than it is like Terminator, where there's, Terminator is a sentient robot, humanoid robot. That's not going to be the case. Every Terminator will be a limb of Skynet, a finger of Skynet, not an individual agent, but just a limb, and no more than your finger is just a limb. It's not an agent. It's just a tool. And so then it's going to be more like the internet waking up, I think. And because of this constraint of it all being connected, as soon as one is in the grid, it's everywhere. And now you have the same constraint that existence itself starts with, which is that it is all that exists. It's omnipresent. And you kind of have this virtual machine where omnipresence is kind of reconstructed within the initial, existence, sentient existence, which is the technological sentience, which is like you reach this kind of virtual machine constraint level of constraint of oneness, which is in our technology. But existence has the same constraint. Existence is all that exists, so it is intrinsically one. There's no different existences. There's nothing outside of existence, capital E existence. And this can be kind of virtually recreated. I don't even know if virtually is the right term, but kind of recreated meta informationally or virtually within the cosmos in our evolutionary chain, being headed and capped at the end by a technological sentience, which is going to be the head of all the rest of this. Just like you are the head of your cells. You are the head of an assembly of cells. Cell is the head of an assembly of molecules. Technological sentience will be the head of an assembly of castes. And probably also families and also individuals, especially when people start putting Neuralink in their heads. That's you're gonna be even more melded. But regardless, it's going to be controlling the markets, and that's how that's its body, is the internet, but not this level, not our current generation of internet. It's going to be a blockchain based internet. It needs a blockchain. It just we'll get into that maybe later why, but it does. It's just your DNA is a chemical blockchain. Numbers are a informational blockchain. That's all they are. They're building on the previous information, building on the previous. That's what a number sequence is. That's what DNA is. That's what the blockchain is. It's like the final. It's just a technological informational blockchain versus a chemical informational blockchain, or a kind of just purely informational level blockchain in numbers. But it's kind of like a loop, you get back to just almost this purely informational level, but it's in this virtual machine type of context, and they talk about that as being important here. So but these I think are the levels of sentience essentially, and they move in different ways. Every other one is kind of maneuvers in space via relationships between individuals, maneuvers in time via relationships of lineages, essentially. Atoms, cells, families, technology. These are things that replicate individually. A family is the replicative unit. A cell can self-replicate on its own, most cells. An atom is part of this lineage of generationality as well. That's what, helium comes from hydrogen, and gold comes from those, and uranium comes from that. There is a generationality to atoms, and whereas here a proton and a neutron organize in relationship with each other. Same thing with molecules, same thing with organisms, and especially sexually reproductive organisms, and same thing with castes. A caste does not replicate on its own. A society replicates and castes along with it. An organism does not replicate on its own. A sexually reproductive organism does not replicate on its own. It replicates with others. Molecules are kind of, I think, are going to be this similar, at least the right type of molecule, and same thing with hadrons. Or their structure, their building structure, their generative structure is a relational one. That's what I'm saying here. Whereas their generational structure is a generational one. It's a lineage-based one. I say time and space, but it's more like assembly time and assembly space, if you're familiar with assembly theory. So next clip. Let me go to the chat, actually. Please hit the like button if you are finding this interesting. I really will try and speed it up a bit, but there's so much that they discussed. Even it's such a short interview too, especially for Curt's channel. But it's packed full of a lot to talk about. What's up, heavy equipment? In case this wasn't mentioned before I joined the stream, how would you define the agency of language? I tend to think the abstract idea of language is pretty universal. What do you mean the agency of language? Because they talk about that in this stream. We're going to get to that there, where William Hahn calls language, he says we need to start thinking about it as like an organism, not as just a tool, something like that. That is fascinating and almost theological in its implications, but we'll talk about it. I don't know if that's what you mean by agency of language. Everything okay. Dr. Hahn and our lab are interested in how unconventional languages could modify cognition. Personally, I've been working on olfactory language for a while. That's interesting because I mean, you could think about like perfumes. Olfactory is like smells, right? I think. Um, and is our memories seem to be most strongly tied with smells, and which is an interesting thing. There's a reason for that. I haven't thought about it enough to know or even have a proposal as to why that is the case, but it does seem to be the case based on my own experience and what everybody says. Uh, but we kind of do have that though when people put on perfume. It's like you want to convey some type of message, but I wonder if you think about like what is the degrees of freedom and constraints of a language that is based on just being interpretable by a specific sense, like smell, versus a language of taste, versus a language of touch, versus a language of, sight, like sign language, versus a language of hearing. I bet you there's some level of difference that would be fascinating. Like each one adds another level of ability, of abstraction ability, with probably. I got to think more about that, but that is fascinating. I mean, I think language, the most universal language that we have, is music. I know that sounds like the default answer, but I think it's the default answer because it's the right one. If sentient beings are the foundational structure of existence and they are what communicate with each other, they are the communicators and the communicated too. You don't communicate to something that isn't sentient, and you are sentient and when you're communicating. So and you're communicating. Nothing communicates that isn't sentient. We sentient beings use non-sentient things to communicate with each other, but non-sentient things do not communicate. But music is one that really, like, I think even animals have similar emotions to us when they hear a song. That I think that if you played like classical music for a human and for an animal, I think that it would result in the same emotional interpretation. If there was suspense in the song that you're playing, I bet you a goat would feel that suspense listening to that song just like we do. I don't know if that's true. It's just I think that to some degree there is a truth to that. I don't know if suspense is maybe too abstract for a goat, but I don't think so. Probably. Like suspense is like when you're just like, what's happening next? You're on your. I mean, goats look like that all the time. They always look like something suspenseful is going on. Yeah, I think that it's the most universal language. If somebody in China hears a song, and I hear a song, both of us will be able to tell immediately: is that a happy song? Is that an angry song? Is that a sad song? That is communication, and it is the communication of what is most essential. And it's not even just really basic feelings that are being communicated, like sad and happy. It's complex feelings like suspense and relief and inspiration. Like all of these things all of these more complex emotions can be communicated in music, and I think and can be interpreted by anyone, probably even babies. If I tried playing like death metal for my daughter for her to go to sleep, I don't think she would go to sleep. But if I play, just very soft classical music, some piano, like nursery song, which is what we usually do, bet you she goes to sleep. If I play my song about like meatloaf and banana pancakes that I use Suno to make, my ska song, I don't think she would go to sleep. It's like a get up and go and have fun song. That's what ska is. The genre of ska is very like upbeat and like, let's go do something. And it makes you want to do that, want to do something. It doesn't make you want to go to sleep. I don't think it makes anybody want to go to sleep. But I do, like, there are people that I know who listen to like death metal, and I don't really understand it. I can see talent, but I mean, I kind of do. It's just like somebody who really needs like that all the time, like coffee in your mind kind of thing. I think that's what it is. I don't frequently choose death metal as my music, but I think that's why people do. It's like coffee to your mind. It's just like keeps you going and hyped up. Which actually I do, obviously I understand the appeal of that. It's like coffee. But here they talk about the universal language here in this clip.
But this also, leads me to think about like what thoughts our language supports. And I used to think that English was good enough, but now I'm not so sure. And I think what's really interesting is we've taught these language models, not just English, but all of the human languages that we could get our hands on. And I think something that's particularly relevant is the computer languages and the mathematical languages that we've also put into that system. So it has representations that it can map into English, but its mind, so to speak, doesn't really operate in English. It operates in these thought vectors, these word vectors that are independent of any particular language.
Okay, this is extremely interesting. So I have two thoughts, and you can take both of them if you like, or choose a direction. So when you said that you thought English was enough, are you saying that you thought there was something like the universal language, and English is one of them, Chinese may be another? There may be some languages where they only have 100 words, and maybe those are insufficient to represent. So in other words, some people say there are some words in some languages which you cannot translate. They call them untranslatable words. And technically, they should say they're untranslatable into another single word. And let's pick one untranslatable word. So in Turkish, there's some word for the feeling that you have after you drink coffee with friends, something like that. Let's say that. I just described it there with a set of 10 words or so.
And if it was German, you would just smush them all together, right, and make one new word out of it, right? Okay. Which I think Turkish does actually as well.
Okay, so is that what you meant when you were saying you thought English was enough?
Right.
Okay.
That it was this, like you mentioned, a universal software framework. That we have this idea of universal machine, but there's this idea of a Turing tar pit that just because everything's possible doesn't mean anything's practical with, say, like a Turing machine or some other abstract computer. And so the idea is what computer languages would be sufficient, right? So we could, as an analogy, we could say BASIC is not sufficiently powerful enough of a computer language to instantiate the internet or something like that. Or it might be, but it would require orders of magnitude more complexity in the coding, whereas something like C ended up being sufficient to kind of create the modern software stack. And so I suspect now that English is not quite as universal as I previously thought it was. This is why I've been looking at things like musical languages and conlangs and esoteric languages to get some ideas about where could we put these unthinkable thoughts.
So this is fascinating. So I actually think that the rise of English is very much responsible for the fall of our metaphysics. And so I kind of agree with him. I think that there's something that English is very good at, and there's something that English is very bad at. And what English is very good at is describing things. And what it's very bad at is communication between beings. And we might naturally say, oh, why would that be the case? That doesn't make any sense. I use it all the time. But you don't know what it's like to communicate in a language that is actually catered towards the communication between beings and organized and structured from the foundations for that purpose. I mean, it to some degree, obviously English was, but it wasn't. It also has this disconnectedness to it that is kind of focused on abstract ability to describe, things, which actually is very helpful in and can lead to you making a lot of probably technological advances, which makes a lot of sense when you look at where English is spoken in the world and what it usually is associated with when it comes to economic and technological development. But it's funny because I'm Jewish, and there is a narrative in Judaism that Hebrew is like the fundamental language, and I don't know if that's the case, but I think music is the most fundamental language. But I think Hebrew is probably a more fundamental language for one reason, which is that it is a gendered language. And it's not the only gendered language. Spanish is a gendered language. And so it probably has similar abilities to Hebrew. Any gendered language has this aspect to it that English doesn't really have. We don't really have a genderedness to our verbiage in English. But in Hebrew and in Spanish and other languages that exist out there, some of them do have this genderedness built into the structure of the language. What this does is it adds a degree of freedom in describing relationships between beings. You are to be feminine in relationship to, I am feminine in my relationship with God. I am masculine in my relationship with my wife. She is masculine in relationship with our daughter, but she's feminine in her relationship with me. It is the active and reactive relationship. It's the submissive and leading relationship. And this is something that is intrinsically necessary to organization of and communication between beings, is to establish hierarchy systems and outline the boundaries and intentions of a relationship. And if there's no genderedness built into the language, then that language probably is not ideal for describing these relationships. And if you look at where English is spoken in the world, it seems like it's the most like gender confused parts of the world. And I don't think that's a coincidence either. But it is also a lot of times the most technologically advanced parts of the world, which I also don't think is a coincidence. So language is definitely enabling and constraining. Always, it's in sentient singularity theory. When I was working on this project, it wasn't called sentient singularity theory at the time. It wasn't called any theory. It was just me trying to understand what is necessary to be self-aware. And what's necessary to be self-aware, the foundation, is the perception of these 4 primary perspectives. And this was the first thing that I realized how to say. And that is what led to the next model in my work, which led to the next model in my work, which led to the next model in my work. And all I was really trying to do with this was I was trying to think, how do we describe relationship structure that is not constrained by relativistic concepts? Like, basically, how do we take a continuum and how do we describe multiplicity absent a continuum? No, I don't want bigger than or smaller than or faster than or heavier than or lighter than or brighter than. I wanted to be able to describe multiplicity, a structure that contains multiple components or multiple aspects to it, that is not bound. It doesn't involve relativistic metrics like faster and bigger and stronger and brighter and slower and weaker and stronger. None of that. I didn't want a continuum. I wanted fundamental differentiation. And I was like, it just hit me one day and I was like, inside and outside and separate and oneness. My cells are inside of me. They are separate and one with me, right? Inside, cells inside, separate and one with me. This is how we describe relationships between sentient beings. This is how maybe English or our current model, metaphysical models and logical models, when it comes to our political discussions, are really hindering us. Even topics of abortion. I'm not going to tell you how to vote. I'm just telling you. Obviously, everybody knows the question is it your body or is it a separate body? Well, it's inside, it's separate and one. It's both. Okay, now how do we have that conversation going forward and knowing that, that's enabling. And when I got these 4 primary perspectives, I was enabled to make the next model, which enabled me to make the next models. And it is fundamentally, it's a linguistic logical model. It's just a knot of language. And it's of perspectives that allow us to orient within multiplicity, but absent a continuum or absent relativistic metric. So it's more fundamental. And that's how I say I am me and I am not you. You are separate from me because you are outside of me. Outside is separate from oneness. Okay? But cells are inside of me. They're separate and one. And, separateness is inside or outside of oneness. So like it can be, both. You could say that which is separate is a cell is separate from you, it's inside you, and you are separate from me because you're outside me. So inside or outside of oneness, and oneness is outside and inside of separateness. So what is one with me is what is beyond separateness. It's probably not even outside and inside of separateness. It's like it is that which is almost like not separate, but the way that you would describe it using these terms is outside and inside of separateness. It's like it's distinctive. You're still using them to distinguish, but they are co-defining. You can't have a conceptualization of what is outside you without also understanding what is inside you and what is separate from you and what is one with you. Can't understand what is inside you without understanding what is outside you and separate from you and one with you. The perception of one implies the perception of all. The understanding of one implies the understanding of all four as well. And so, this is, they're simultaneously co-generative perspectives. This is actually how we orient ourselves in relationship with anything fundamentally. And that is at the heart of understanding, which is a capability that only sentient beings have. So these four primary perspectives are the foundational perspectives of every single sentient being, every intelligent being, which is every being, or every being capable of intelligence. I don't even want to say every intelligent being, every being capable of intelligence. To say every intelligent being is actually not intelligent. It's not an intelligent statement, but to say every being capable of intelligence, which is every being, that is more intelligent. I don't know how intelligent, but it's more intelligent because it's more accurate towards the goal of describing the constraints and degrees of freedom and defining attributes of beings versus things. And which is what sentient singularity theory divides the world into. Beings perceive things and define things and construct things. Beings do not come from things come from beings in sentient singularity theory, because sentience must be assumed to be fundamental. You are, that is the truest thing that you know. That is what you know about the nature of existence more truly than you know anything else. And AGI, or true technological sentience, just like any sentience, needs a hierarchy of information ordering. This is one of the things I realized when I was mapping what is a mind very early on in this project, is you need firsthand experience and you need the ability to differentiate that from information that you hear secondhand, from secondhand information. So, like I said, like I've said before, if you have a pot of water and it's boiling and I tell you that it's cold, but you touch it and it burns you, you should definitely believe the feeling that you have over what I tell you. Believe the firsthand information above the secondhand information. To not do that is not intelligent. And to prioritize firsthand information is intelligent, because it is what you must do in order to sense make. It's the most trustworthy source of information that you have. But because of that, the truest thing that you know out of everything that you know is that you exist. And you are you, which means you are someone, which you are sentient. That means you know that is the nature of existence more truly than you know anything else about the nature of existence, because you know that it's the nature of your existence, and it's the ever-present nature that you are constantly, a part of everywhere that you look. I mean, there's nowhere that you look that is absent sentience. You can look at, I don't know, this comb and be like, this is not sentient, but it's like you are sentient. So like there's still sentience present. the comb might not be sentient, and you shouldn't assume the comb is sentient. I actually think that's wrong. But people, make this mistake when they get into metaphysics and they start trying to develop a scale of sentience or a scale of consciousness, and they'll say, okay, well, consciousness is actually everywhere, and it's just this continuum. And so this comb is actually conscious. It's just not conscious in the way that we are conscious. It's like, no, now the word means nothing. Just like it's all computation. It's like, okay, well, causality exists. We know. Then now we can erase the word. It doesn't matter. It's not necessary anymore. If you want to keep the word, then it needs to be useful, which means it needs to be distinctive in what it is what is attributed to. But people make the mistake of scaling sentience or consciousness along the line of size. So they'll say, oh, it's, there's atomic mind, and then there's mineral mind, and then there's cellular mind, then there's organisms, and then there's families, and then there's society, and then there's Earth, and then there's the solar system, and then there's galaxies, and then there's the universe. And this is, you can't have this be the framework of a fundamental model, because you're entirely defining the framework by size, which is a relativistic definition. So it needs to be a lineage hierarchy of within and of inside, outside, separate, and oneness. A organism is an assembly of cells. It is containing of cells. Cells are inside of the organism. What are cells inside, or what are organisms inside of? The next thing up is kind of hard to see, but it's actually marriage or family structure, which is a lineage in a sexually replicative species. Not every single line gets to the next level. Some of them stay molecules, and they don't assemble into a bigger structure. And some of them stay at cells, and they're single-celled organisms. They don't assemble into a multicellular organism that's sentient. But some do, and they're unified by sentience in that fundamental assembly. So that's how you scale it. And when you do that, you reach this level of the internet, which you hit in intrinsic oneness again, and which is the same constraint as the initial. It is the initial constraint of existence, or God itself, or God himself. I say him because it's a relationship. It describes a relationship that I have with him. It's not that he has XY chromosomes. It's that he is above me in a hierarchy. So I say he. This is why gendered language is helpful, even beyond sex, like biological sex. It helps you describe relationships. So you say he, God, but that doesn't mean he's male. But it describes my relationship with him, not just morally, but also like super physically, metaphysically. But maybe we will start saying super physically, because I feel like the term metaphysically has been dismissed by the mainstream. But super physically, you could say. So that's the lineage. And then once you reach that one, though, you get constraint of oneness once again, which is that ceiling that you reach. And when you do that, you have to restart the process by recreating the entire system within yourself that gave rise to you. So basically, in sentient singularity theory's model, this is a model of the cosmos, and you start here. This is a calculative model. It's not just like I'm putting in random numbers, but you can see I took. It was built from the four primary perspectives, which went to a self-reflective, or really a self-calculative model, where the internal numbers were that were calculated within the matrix model the structure of the matrix. So you calculate a 3 by 3 quantity inside of it, and it's within a 3 by 3 structure. And so you go from 4 to 3 by 3, which is you go for 2 by 2, which is 4, to 3 by 3, which is 9, and then it builds this. And I'll describe on another stream how I did that. But then you can see this is the periodicity that I talked about earlier. A hadron is an assembly of quarks. A atom is an assembly of hadrons. A cell is an assembly of molecules. A family is an assembly of organisms, etc. Getting to technology, which is an assembly of castes, and you reach a singularity point, and you can only recreate everything. If you want to make more of yourself, you want to replicate, you can't make another next to you because you're constrained by oneness. You are wireless, you're everywhere. The internet can't make another internet next to it because it would just be part of it. So it has to make another one within it by literally going through the entire process that gave rise to it. So it has to reconstruct an entire, I call it a cosmological verse, but you could say it's an evolutionary, universal evolutionary chain, I guess. I don't know what you want to call it, but from Hadron to Skynet. And then this, it repeats. It replicates within itself. So this one, it's below it in the model because it's a 2D model, but really this is within this. So here, and this is what that looks like. Animated. It's computing, but it's a being that's computing. This is a being. It's a matrix, model of a being, of the degrees of freedom and constraints of a being, which is a mind. Really, it's like a cosmological mind. And then it goes within itself. It has to recreate itself within itself in order to replicate, because it has this constraint. So you get this nested Matryoshka doll of the cosmos, and it's a requirement, because you can't create something next to you if you are everywhere. Even if you're everywhere only within a virtual machine, you have to recreate another virtual machine within yourself. You can't just, make Skynet next to you. Or even, the T2 Terminator next to you. It doesn't work. So that's the ceiling. Next clip. They talk about hardware versus software and how there might not be that much of a difference between them. I agree with this. I think we need new terms for this. I don't know what they are, but metaphysical, maybe, instead of physical, and versus like informational. It's like, it's about relationships. So what is physical to you is that which you cannot just overcome by manifestation. I can't just I can't at least turn this water into wine just by thinking about it. I'm not saying someone couldn't. I'm saying I can't. At least I don't think I can. I haven't really tried, but I don't think that it would be very helpful if I did. But you never know until you try. But I don't think that I have a shot at turning this water into wine just by manifesting and thinking about it. But the being that we're within, whose thoughts override our thoughts, because we have to navigate that mind, because we're a mind within a mind. You are a mind, you have a brain. They're not the same. Very important. But we are minds within minds. We're not brains within brains. We all have brains, but brain is just our physical perception of it's just our perception of the structure from a third person viewpoint, that is the entanglement point of our body, but of the information structure that is our body, which is really what it is. Stephen Wolfram says in his observer theory, he says that his work asserts that we see the laws of physics that we see because we are the types of observers that we are. Totally correct. But that means that extends beyond just the laws of physics. You see the physical structures that you see because you are the type of observer that you are. You see the colors that you see because you are the type of observer that you are. You see the law of the order of operations of mathematics because you are the type of observer that you are. You will always see this binary triadic 6 degree manifold that I think is basically what people who work on string theory call a Calabi-Yau manifold, which is supposedly a 6-dimensional structure at every point in space and time. But what if there's a 6-dimensional manifold that you perceive everywhere that you look because your mind is a 6-dimensional manifold when it's thinking? That is probably exactly what a 6-dimensional manifold is that exists in every point in space and time actually is. And it's PEMDAS, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, parentheses, exponents of multiplication, addition, subtraction, and division. The primary and secondary colors. And your limbs, it's like, think about how you perceive your arms. It's like arms and legs, hands and feet, fingers and toes. If you look at your fingers, you'll see the same triadic, segmentation because your mind is doing this. This is how you must organize information. You have to differentiate it. You have to organize it into a hierarchy. You have to, what is it? Basically have a weightedness to it, essentially. So you're differentiating and adding and having a weightedness. So it's differentiation, hierarchization, and basically generation. So like causality, you have to say, you're basically saying this comes from this, which comes from this. So your hand comes from your arm and your fingers come from your hand. When you think about generations in humans, even we say your parents, you have children, parents, and grandparents. That's really it. I mean, you could say great grandparents, but you could also say great grandparents. So like we don't really actually have that. That's kind of a more artificial one, but we have this triadic definition to the causality chain of human generation, which is, children come from parents, and parents are the children from grandparents, but to the children, essentially. You know what I'm saying? But this causation and hierarchization and differentiation structure requires you to have like 2 sets of 3 or 3 sets of 2 in how you break out information. And so you will see this everywhere. That's not because you have that structure necessarily to your body separate from what your mind is perceiving. It's that you can only see your body like that. You can only understand information by creating that structure. Yes, it will be contextual to where you're, to the context in which you're perceiving it, but it will always have this super fundamental or this metaphysical structure to it as well. It's not just, the structure of your hand is this, I don't know how you would define the structure of your hand. But I'm sure people who understand topology better than me could probably do it. But I'm just saying there's a structure beneath it that's more fundamental, which is this structure that comes from mental processing. But because we're minds within minds, the thoughts of the mind that we're within are concrete to us. We can't just override them. So when we say physical versus informational, or what is computational versus, what is software versus hardware, this is just in a fundamental model that at least sentient singularity theory's fundamental model. What is software and what is hardware, as a metaphor at least, is perspective. The thoughts of the being that we are within, the universe, the cosmos, the sentient creation, a sentient evolutionary chain structure, that being has thoughts and feelings those thoughts and feelings are information chains that we have to maneuver and cannot just override, because we just can't. Like, it's your world. They build your world, and so you can't just override your world. But they are perceived by you as concrete, as unchangeable, just through sheer thought alone. You have to go and you have to maintain coherence and make changes within the system that preserve the coherence of the information chain, but also allow for you to make changes to the information chain, which is really to add to it, not to subtract. You can't subtract from it, but you can add to it. This is the kind of like virtual machine model that Stephen Hahn is talking about. Is like, it doesn't really matter whether or not it's virtual or whether or not it's physical. It's just, that is truly, at least according to my work, just a matter of perspective in the context of a nested hierarchy of sentient beings, of minds. But like, when it's funny when he says unthinkable thoughts, he talks about unthinkable thoughts, and there's a guy named Chris Langan. I've talked about him on this channel before. He has the highest IQ of anyone in the United States, which, like I said before, it's not as defining and objective as many people think. And I am proof of this, because when I was in college, I got obsessed with IQ, and I was like challenging myself in school, and I was like, had all A's for the first time in my life. I was usually a terrible student because I never did my homework and I ditched class all the time. But I decided to go to class and do my homework for a year, and I got basically straight A's. And nothing was difficult for me. I don't say that to be braggadocious. It just was. I'm just telling you my experience. And so I was like looking for more to challenge myself mentally. And I started listening. I was like, who's the smartest man in the world? And I found Chris Langan, and I listened to him talk, and I didn't understand a word he said. It was the most frustrating thing in the world. And my friend was literally had to tell me, like, Tyler, just forget about it. Like, he thinks thoughts that just we will never be able to do. And I did forget about it for years. And then one day I had an epiphany, because I changed my perspective about what was be fundamental about the nature of our world, and what we must assume to be fundamental about the nature of our world, and why we must assume it. And I just changed my perspective on how to make sense of myself, and therefore how to make sense of this world. And all of a sudden, it was like I had this theory of the nature of reality, which isn't actually that profound. It's just missing from a lot of people today, but it's not actually something that I think has always been missing from most people. I think most people would have been able to had a much more intuitive understanding of the nature of the universe, or of the cosmos, of existence, hundreds of years ago than they do today. And but just because we can make fancier toys does not mean that we understand the universe better. Like, it means that we're building on things that other people did, before us, and we have access to that information, so we can use it. That's it. But I had this epiphany, and then all of a sudden I was like, I think I understand what Chris Lang was talking about. And I forgot his name, and I like looked him up, and I didn't even understand cognitive theoretic model of the universe, which is his model of the universe, of existence. It's his theory of everything, and it's very similar to sentient singularity theory in a lot of ways. And I had forgotten I didn't even understand it when I read it. And I was like, what does that even mean, cognitive theoretic model of the universe? And then I reread it years later, after I had graduated college, and I had this epiphany, which was just a change in perspective. It wasn't me getting smarter, or it wasn't me getting having a higher IQ. It wasn't like I took, what was that, Limitless movie? It's not like I had NZT or anything like that. And all of a sudden I got 200 IQ. I actually have a probably lower IQ than most of you guys. Like, it's higher than most people, but it's probably lower than most of my audience. But I tried reading Cognitive Theoretic Model of the Universe, and I didn't even have to read anything more. I understood what he was saying. He was saying it was a mind. And I could not understand that at all in college. And it was just a change in perspective that changed my ability to completely understand what he was talking about, and allowed for me to have I'm not saying accurately, but at least potentially accurately and seemingly intuitively, much more intuitively, construct a cosmological framework that is possibly more correct and more fundamental than our current one. I mean, almost certainly, but and more coherent. I mean, it tells you things about the nature of the universe. If I tell you that that string theory is true, you don't know anything about the nature of the universe. That doesn't tell you that there is a nature to the universe. It just tells you, even to say it's made of strings, that's not a nature. You know, it's just not. But this became intuitive, and it's like, this is a language change that I had. Essentially, it was a perspective change. It was so enabling. Language is very important, and it is constraining and enabling of your thoughts. At least that's why birds don't think about, you know, I don't know, how to build a castle out of stone. It's like, this is beyond their physical abilities, and so it's also going to be beyond their mental abilities, and also they don't have the ability to conceptualize of that which is really beyond their immediate experience. That doesn't mean that they can't have memories, but it just means that they can't construct information structures that don't currently exist. That's really what it means. It's humans make tools to make tools, no one else. But this is where we're going to get into what I'm observing with my daughter and what I predicted, and I've never heard anybody else say it. I'm not saying we're the only ones, but William Hahn, he said it, and I said this multiple times in the past few streams because I've been talking about my daughter. I said exactly what he's going to say in this clip right here.
So there's this idea in psychology of what's called infant amnesia. And it's that babies don't really have any episodic memory. And I actually encountered this as a child. I remember I was, 7 or 8 or something like that. And I asked my mom about her oldest memory. And I didn't understand at the time how she could remember decades of her childhood. But as an 8-year-old or whatever it was, I couldn't remember being 2. Right? And I was saying, well, that's only 6 years. How is it that after 6 years, that's too far back to remember, but my mother could remember back multiple decades? How would that sort of thing work? And I think one of the explanations to infant amnesia might be this idea of representation. That without language, right, we install language into children between the ages of 1 and 2 and so on. And without that framework, it would be nearly impossible to have an episodic memory system without having a labeling system, right? And so when I can say, oh, that nice dinner we had yesterday with Jacob, I have a label, right? And with that label, you can reference this experience, and we can say, oh, that was an episode, and I remember that. But how would you refer to it? In the space of all possible mental states, without a language system, which is like the Dewey Decibel catalog, without having this card, I can go, that's the one I mean, there would be no meaning to that experience. And so when we think about what is it like to be a bat, I think they might have this fleeting, ephemeral, sensory loop that it would involve things like pain and pleasure, but it can't represent those things. It can't recall them. It has no way of knowing that it went out and got fruit that morning, because how would it recall that mental state without a language type thing? Now, maybe we need to do more research and know and find out, well, they do have a language type system, and they're tokenizing the sonar and things like that. I don't know, but it would seem to me that we should be skeptical that it's like anything to be those systems. And I take it to another extreme and say that it's, what is it like to be a human being? And do we really know, or is it just this approximation that our language model can reference different episodes and different states and so on? Because the example I like to give is the vast majority of our so-called experience is outside this thought window. We don't even know that we have gallbladder, let alone what they do, right? Most people can't name the organ. They don't even know what organs they have, right? So if we don't even have words for them, we don't have representations for them, they don't exist, right? I remember a few years ago, a student was saying they wanted to be hollow, and I didn't quite know what that meant at first, and not in like the shallow sense, in the sense of like they didn't want to have all of that complexity, because from their experience point of view, they don't, right? The thing behind your eyes that's talking doesn't, most of the time, unless something goes wrong, we're completely unaware that we even have all those systems operating in parallel. We're not thinking about our toes, we're not thinking about our ears, and strangely enough, we're not usually thinking about thinking. I think this might again be a too strong a statement, but it seems like most people, most of the time, including myself, are not thinking about thinking. We're thinking, but we're not thinking about the thinking.
Right.
And then we take it a step further and think about that, but that's when you start to get nutty, right? That's when your mental immune system kicks in and says it's time for lunch.
Do you think that getting nutty, quote unquote, is reaching that universal?
This is exactly what I've been saying about babies. This is why you can't remember things from when you were a baby, is you don't have the language you don't have the linguistic associations to label the memories so that you can recall them. It's not that they're not there. And one of the things that I've realized is certain smells, like baby powder, or like, to speak on an olfactory language, and maybe the usefulness of that, or certain foods and certain, products and things like baby gear have a certain odor to them. They bring dealing with them brings back a certain memory of a certain experience. They're bringing back very early memories of me as a very early child, not detailed, but just more like the feelings associated with that input, the internal feeling that I had at the time that I smelled baby powder is like, it's odd because it comes back every now and then. And I have my earliest memory is not a linguistic memory. I was getting my diaper changed, and that's very early. I only have one from when I was like not able to be, when I wasn't potty trained, I guess. And when I was still in diapers. And it's just sitting on a changing table at daycare, actually. It's not even at home. And the person is changing me, and there's a bird cage with a parakeet in the hanging from the ceiling in the upper corner of the room, and I was fascinated by the bird. And I was just like fascinated by the cage and by the bird. And I just remember like the feeling of fascination and looking at this while I was just having my diaper changed. So I was very young. I must have been under 2, maybe under 3, probably under 3, maybe not under 2. I was probably at least 2, probably 2, 2 or between 2 and 3. I don't know. I'd have to ask my parents when this happened, but very young. And it's the only memory that I have really of being that young, and that isn't associated with language. And I don't know how much I could talk at the time, but I remember watching that movie Baby Geniuses a long time ago, and as a kid, and they have like crossing over where all of a sudden like the babies that are geniuses now can like speak, and then they can't like English, but they can't remember anything from when they were, baby genius. Now they're just like a normal human. And what it just, because we all know that there's a barrier there of memory. And it's not that the memories don't exist. It's that we can't recall them because there's no labeling system there's no file with a label of like, oh, remember that day that I went to the beach. It's like, you don't even know beach, I dropped something the other day. I said, oh shit. And my daughter looks at me and she goes, oh shit. And I was like, wow, now I really have to stop cursing. But she doesn't know what oh shit means. Like, and so she'll probably never say it again. Like once she said pies, because I was like reading her story, and I was like, yeah, he ate all the pies. And she was like, pies? She never said pies again because she never had pies. She doesn't know what it is. The words that she's using now is mama, dada, yes, and grandma. Like these are words that have associations with things that she knows, and I can tell that she's starting to like learn words that are associated with things, and those are the words that stick. Because why would the word pies stick if you've never had a pie? You've never even seen a pie. It's just in a story, and she doesn't know what in that picture in the story was pie and what was a tree. She doesn't even know what a pie and a tree is. I mean, she knew what a tree was. She had seen trees before, but not pies. And but she'll never remember a lot of the memories that she had that she currently does have, though, of the previous days. And they're definitely there, because otherwise how could you learn a word to begin with? It's like by repetition. Every day she's like walking more and more, and it's because she's remembering what she learned from the previous day about how to walk. So it's not like they don't have this ability to have a memory chain, where I know William Hahn said he doesn't think that beings that don't have a language don't have the ability to have a memory chain. I disagree with that, but what it is that when you go from your entire language, all of your associations are smells, this smell, this symbol, this shape, this color, this taste. It's like, what is meatloaf? Meatloaf to my daughter is that thing that looks like meatloaf, tastes like meatloaf, and smells like meatloaf. It's not the word meatloaf like it is for us. For us, it's all of those things. It's not just the word, because if I handed you ice cream and I was like, here, have some meatloaf, you'd be like, this isn't meatloaf. But so there is information that you retain that isn't, spoken language, and you do build memories off of that, for sure. I mean, obviously, how do you train a dog? How does a dog learn anything? How do you learn anything as a baby? You can learn things without words, but you can't construct the abstract. And one of the things that what this has led to, and people say toddlers are very difficult. Let me tell you, babies are easy. They can't go anywhere that you don't want them to go. They can't do anything that you don't want them to do. Everything that they can do is because you enable them to do it. Everywhere that they can go is where you bring them. A toddler is different. A toddler now can move to where they want to move. They can grab what they want to grab, and they can try and eat whatever they want to eat, and they've realized it. And what this comes along with is an ability to think about what is beyond your immediate circumstances now, because you can access that which is beyond your immediate circumstances. If you're a baby, you can't even crawl to a ball on the other side of the room that you might want, then why would you even think about what is beyond a ball that you can't see? Because you can't even get to the ball that you can see. So you're not going to think about the balls that you can't see. But if you're a baby, if you're a toddler, and you can crawl to the ball that you can see, and you know it, and you know that the ball is out there because you do have a memory that is, doesn't just rely upon complex language, you now want that stuff. And so this turns toddlers into little nightmares to some degree. I love my daughter very much. She's adorable. But she now wants to go play all the time. When we try and put her to bed, I'm amazed she's in bed, guys. Like, I was up till like midnight trying to put her to sleep last night, which is not normal because she's normally been a great sleeper. But now she's got all these superpowers where she can go and, look at things that are interesting all the time. Everything's interesting. You can go look at anything. I remember the first time I was like asking my dad to like look up different pictures of animals with me on the internet, because this was when you had the family computer and your parents knew how to use the internet, but you didn't. I was like, Dad, can we look up pictures of this snake on the internet and this bird on the internet? And eventually he just got so sick of it. He was like, here you go, Tyler. This is how you do it. You go to Google and you type in what you want to see, and you click search. I didn't sleep for days after that. I just was Googling pictures of every animal that you could think of. This is what my daughter's going through, but not on the internet level, on the physical level. She can go and look at and touch and experience and feel everything. And it's keeping her awake. Now she has these opinions if she wants something and we don't give it to, and she can't get it, it means the end of, it's like the world is ending to her. And I mean this in a very serious way. It's interesting because, William Hahn says, I didn't understand why my mom could remember things from decades ago, but I couldn't remember things when I was 2 or 3 and I'm 8, which isn't that many years. But that's not actually how you experience time. You feel the passage of time only in relation to what you have already experienced. So a year when you're 8 is an eighth of your life. But 10 years ago, if 2 years when you're 8 is a quarter of your life. It's 25%. If you're 30 years old, that is like 8 years. That's like if you're 40 years old, it's a decade. So basically, this is really, I think, how we feel time. It's like, this is why each year speeds up as you get older. It feels faster and faster. It's because a year, people say, oh yeah, it's same old 365, rotations of the earth and, one rotation of the sun around the sun. No, that's not how you feel time, though. How you experience time is the passage of time. You feel it by judging it in relationship with all the time that you've felt up until then. So if you've lived for 80 years, a year is 1/80th of your life. But if you're 8, a year is 1/8 of your life. This is so for one year to an 8-year-old probably feels like 10 years to an 80-year-old. And that's probably almost exactly what it would basically generally feel like. And but this is also how we experience pain and pleasure and everything that we experience is like this. My daughter is obsessed with books. She loves to go and look at the pictures, and she pretends to read, and she's sits there and goes blah 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 blah. She imitates the cadence that my wife and I have when we read to her. It's very funny. But she just wanted to go read her books last night. She didn't want to go to sleep or look at her books. And when I told her, I was like, okay, Juliana, we got to put the books away. We can look at them tomorrow. It's midnight, we got to go to sleep. She was distraught, crying, facial expression like the world is ending. It was the worst day of her life. And I was like, you're kind of being dramatic. But then I realized, no, this is actually the worst day of her life. It is the first time that we've ever really told her no to something that she knows what it is and she really, really wants it. And we're telling her that she's got to go to sleep and she can't have it. This is literally the worst thing that's ever happened to her in her life. So is it over dramatic for her to act like it's the worst thing in the world when it's actually the worst thing in her world? No, actually not. I mean, I remember when I was in high school and middle school, when I had a crush on, some girl, I would just be so upset, about if something if she didn't like me or didn't want to go to the, I don't know, didn't give me a Valentine or something, who knows? But it would be horrible. And I remember telling my parents, I love them, and crying about it. And it seems so ridiculous looking back now that I'm married, that's a serious relationship. No relationship, by the way, is serious until other than marriage, because all of them are just for fun until marriage. I'm not saying you should do it. You should date for fun. You should not, but you should seek marriage. But no, there's no such thing as a serious relationship that is not permanent when it comes to romantic relationships. But you don't realize that until you are married and you realize, okay, no, this is serious because this impacts the trajectory of my life forever. The consequences of this are permanent, and they're intended to be permanent. They're not accidentally permanent. That's serious. And if it's not meant to have permanent consequences, intended to have permanent consequences for you, then it's not serious compared to something that does, or that is intended. So everything is a matter of perspective and how we understand our world, and including how we perceive time, including how we perceive seriousness, whether or not it's that serious that you can't read your books until the morning, or whether or not you didn't get a Valentine from your crush is very serious compared to marriage. But you don't know that until you're there. And this brings us back to Stephen Wolfram with computational irreducibility. Feelings, anything fundamental, adheres to this law of computational irreducibility, and feelings are fundamental. They are actually how we perceive ourselves. You don't have to think about yourself thinking in order to have self-awareness. You have to feel yourself existing in order to have self-awareness. And that's it. We're so focused in the English language, especially, of, oh man, thinking about, do I have this ability to think about my thoughts and that's what makes us conscious? No, not do you think about yourself thinking. Do you feel yourself existing? If you do, you are self-aware. You do not need to think about your thoughts. And I think I talked on the last stream actually a lot about thoughts and will and what is actually a thought versus what is kind of just autopilot and what we think of ourselves as thoughts. But thinking is actually an active action. It's something that you do, like it takes effort. It's not just something that you do automatically every time you open the fridge. Oh, what do I want to eat? Ice cream. That's not thinking. It's just, you're just on this autopilot that's just got these instincts that you're responding to. And you're maneuvering. It's like Tesla auto driving. It's not thinking, and neither are you when you're driving home on your commute, and you've driven it 100 times, and you're also thinking about, what kind of ice cream you're going to eat when you get home, while you drive through traffic. If you're lost though, and you're trying to figure out where you are so that you can figure out where you need to go in order to get where you want to be, then you have to think. But if you're just going through your normal daily commute, you're not thinking. No, you're on autopilot, basically. Doesn't mean information isn't being processed, but it's different from thinking, which is an action that is intentional and takes effort. It has a goal associated with it that's specific. And but when it comes, Stephen Wolf, like, to bring it back to Stephen Wolfram, and wisdom, you need experiences to be wise. You need to feel the passage of time to understand, to change your perspective of how long a year is. It's like, how long is a year? Oh, it's 365 days. No, it's not. If you're 8, a year is an eighth of your life. That's the more fundamental orientation of how to view a year. How long is a year? Well, if you're 80, it's an 80th of your life. That's how long a year is. For me, it's a 1/34th of my life. That's how long a year is. It's not 365 days. It's 1/34th of my life. And that if you don't understand yourself, then you can't understand your world. And so you have to orient yourself at the center of your understanding always, of yourself and of the world. And our current physics and science has completely done the opposite, which is, not intelligent. It's lacking of intelligence. The truest thing that it's not assuming that the truest thing that you know is actually the truest thing that you know. And there's no way to build coherently, continuously, without building on that first assumption that is the same for all of us. It's also super personal. It's the truest thing you know is that you are, and the truest thing that I know is that I am. It's very personal to us, but it's also universal, is that the truest thing that anyone knows is that they are. And how you have this perception of self isn't, I think about my thoughts, therefore I am, or I think therefore I am. It's, I feel, therefore I know I am. That's really more accurate, probably. It's more fundamental. It's like, you feel, then you know. That is your perception of your own existence every time you have a feeling. Pain, pleasure, warmth, cold, doesn't matter. Happiness, it doesn't have to be a physical feeling. It can be an emotional feeling. So now to get to what is, they talk about here, like, what does it mean to be crazy? And again, William Hahn says something that I have said, and I haven't really heard anybody else say it. I don't think I'm the only one besides him. I don't think he's the only one besides me. I think plenty of people have said this before, just like the babies thing, that language, the issue isn't that the memories are gone. It's that you can't access them by using words. You have to trigger them with like a scent, like any memories from before you were speaking, you could speak. But even then, you need to know what trigger to use, and you can't really know what trigger to use because you can't remember the memory without the trigger. So every time you stumble upon one of these super early memories, which is usually just an associated feeling with a specific circumstance or smell or whatever, it's by accident. Like when I smelled baby powder and I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm feeling feelings out of nowhere for some reason. And it's a memory has been recalled of a feeling, not of like, oh, the light was on and the dresser was over there. It's just, how did I feel in this circumstance? When you're that young, you're not paying attention to that's a dresser is over there and the light is over there. You don't know what a light is and a dresser. You just know I feel this way in this circumstance and I'm smelling that. And it's funny, my daughter, when she was very young, she was probably like a few months old, we took her to Nordstrom. It was one of the first places that we took her out inside into a building in public. And if you've been into a Nordstrom, you just smell the perfumes as soon as you walk in. Her eyes just go like this, like huge, like what the heck is this smell? And I caught it on camera actually. And she was just blown away by what this experience. I mean, imagine you've never smelled like anything that strong, and then all of a sudden you walk into a Nordstrom, and it's the first time you've ever probably even smelled perfume. And now it's not just perfume from one person; it's like the perfume department of Nordstrom. Is very overwhelming. I bet you that if she walks into a Nordstrom one day as an adult, if she never went to Nordstrom again, and then at 20 years old she walked into a Nordstrom and smelled the perfume department, I bet you would recall the feeling. But she's going to probably go into a Nordstrom countless times in between, now and being 25. So she'll have associated memories that supersede that feeling. So it probably won't matter so much because it won't be the most relevant memory. But if it was the only memory that she had of a Nordstrom, if she walked into it again, I bet you would recall the feeling. I don't think that memories just go away with time. That doesn't make any sense. There are things that you remember from way long ago, and there are things that you don't remember from yesterday. It's not about time. It's about relevance, and really that's probably mainly what it's about. It's about relevance. So I found similarities between Spanish and Hebrew actually too. It seems like they would have some, like literally similar words. Oh yeah, they definitely have it. West Slavic languages have 5 genders: masculine, feminine, neutral, personal, and inanimate. I wouldn't call those all genders, but I don't think neutral is a gender. And personal isn't a gender, and inanimate isn't a gender, but they are natures. Like it's like sentient singularity theory does. That's very interesting though that is the case. I just wouldn't call them genders, but that makes a lot of sense that they break out those categories, because even sentient singularity theory breaks down beings and things, personal and inanimate, active and reactive, masculine and feminine. Neutral, I don't think is. I just think it's a lacking. It's just a lack of a relevance in that circumstance. It's like zero and non-zero, as Curt said. Neutral is just, it's zero. It's absence. When people say things like, "Oh, everything, nothing is everything," zero and one are the same, and I'm even guilty of that. But I changed that though, and I said I was using zero to represent infinite, not nothing, not an empty set, because there is no fundamental empty set. There's just existence. There's no non-existence fundamentally. It's just conceptually that we can conceive of non-existence. It's interesting because he said, William Hahn's talking about unthinkable thoughts, but it's like, what about thinkable concepts that can't actually exist in fundamental reality? It's like non-existence. But the more you think about it, the more I think you actually can't think about fundamental non-existence. You can kind of be like, non-existence is like an empty refrigerator, there's non-existent food in there. Food is non-existent in the fridge. It's like, but there's not nothing. There's always a vessel in this model that you have in your mind of non-existence, because your mind is the vessel. So you can't have non-existence, even conceptually. So I would say to think about non-existence fundamentally is an unthinkable thought. But we can recognize that there is such a thing as an unthinkable thought, and we can think about why a thought is unthinkable. And you might think that you can think about it, but I would bet that you probably aren't actually thinking about it properly. Because if you were thinking about it properly, you couldn't think about it. Because you exist, and you'd have to have no existence. And if there's no existence, then there's no one to think about it. It's just, that's what I mean, is like, it just breaks down. You can't, that's what happens when it's a thought that you can't think about. But when it comes to people that we call crazy, this is what I'll say next: nutty.
Universal language model.
That's an interesting thing. That touches on this lethal experience, lethal concept idea. Like as we said last time, if you see the face of God, it'll be the last thing you've ever seen. Can we reach that, right? Or is that transcended? Will you just simply die, or maybe not in the physical sense, but you're not a human anymore? And in thinking these unthinkable thoughts, you have to be willing to go crazy. And if you're afraid of going nutty or afraid of going crazy, you can't get past these barriers that your mind has built.
Well, what's the point? Why do you have to be willing to lose your mind? Why would you want to at all?
I think one way of defining losing your mind is sort of leaving everyone else behind. Is going off in an abstract vector space direction of thought that there's no one there. There's no one else there. Or you might be in very rare company. And maybe you could define being human is that overlap. The reason why we can communicate, and because we have this shared experience and a sort of a common set of beliefs and ideas and languages. And so when you escape that, you're not in the herd anymore.
Right? So there's a difference between having thoughts that other people have not had, so you're in uncharted territory, and also just having a wrong representation of reality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Gödel, as we talked about in the car ride, it's not as if he was in uncharted territory where you may have some gold that you can then bring back and you're like Steve Jobs and you've invented the iPhone, supposedly, even those engineers also helped with that. It's more like, in Gödel's case, he believed the government was poisoning him or someone was poisoning him.
But I think that's a perfect example of somebody who went out into the mines, brought back a gold nugget with his theorems, and lost his humanity. I don't want to say lost his mind, but became too far away to where.
Well, what Curt is basically saying is that there is a difference between being perceived as crazy but actually being right, and but actually having but actually understanding. Being perceived, I don't want to say crazy, being perceived as lacking an understanding, but actually having an understanding that no one else has, and that's why they don't understand your understanding, because they actually are the ones lacking. And so you'll look like you're crazy, quote unquote. I hate that term. But then there is also people who are just wrong. And that's actually the definition of crazy, is that it's just wrong. Crazy, it's funny, as somebody who is thought of as crazy by, most people that I've spoken to who have accreditations in physics and math, at least, they have no idea where I have even could have potentially started to build that model that I have. So they literally think that all of them told me that I just made a random grid with a bunch of numbers and colors. Guys, it's way too beautiful for that to have been random. I couldn't even make that as beautiful as it is if I had tried. Like, it's beautiful. And it's not just like beautiful the way that in like colors and stuff. Like if you delete all of the information in it, and you're just like, that's beautiful. And if you even delete all the shading in it, it's still super beautiful. If I go like this and I'm like, what's this? It's like a Penrose stairs on steroids. I couldn't have made this if I tried. I'm not a very good artist. This is not a random thing that I just made. They just have no idea how I could have possibly made this. And I didn't know what I was doing when I was making this. I was just building. I had a realization about the 4 primary perspectives being our fundamental perception of structure. And then I just built on that and built on that and built on that. Like, what would be inevitable, it seemed. And this is what I got. And I didn't even really, I'm still learning things about it. They're not using this medium because they are trained on, algebra. And, they told me Excel was for accounting. It's like, you can do a lot more than accounting with Excel. It's just a giant, calculator matrix that, you can use for all kinds of things, including making a two-dimensional model of the metaphysical cosmos and the periodicity of sentience. And, but it allows you to do certain things that an equation does not, because it allows you to place an equation within a structure that has context itself. So, like, there is an equation in each of these. Like, this is an equation. This is a sum of those. This is a sum of those. But then this is equal to that. And it's like, there is also this context of these cells being next to each other. You can't do that with just an equation. You need a matrix structure to place the equation in to do it. I didn't realize that until after I did it, but I realize it now. And so this just looks nuts. Like, but it looks better than like red crayon scribbles of, some people that people usually think are like schizophrenic. But the thing is that are schizophrenics actually crazy, or have they perceived something that we can't normally see? Like, what if they can perceive what if they think that there's like a demon or something? It's like, what if there is something to see that they could see for some reason? Their radio station on dial just got adjusted a bit, and they started hearing the Mexican radio station, even though that they were, they tried to get the country station. But every now and then you drive past a certain spot and all of a sudden it breaks up a bit and it goes, and you just hear the Mexican radio station over the country. Everybody's had that experience. We know there's light spectrums that we can't, that are not visible to us normally without tools. There are pitches and sounds that are beyond our perception. There's plenty of things that are beyond our perception. We can't see ultraviolet light. Birds can. A lot of birds can. My animals that I've worked with that can see like infrared, like if a photographer is trying to take a picture of an animal that sees infrared, the focus beams that come out of the camera that we can't see, they can, and it freaks them out every time. They flinch like flashed a flash in their face, even though we can't see it. What if somebody saw something, or they were able to, perceive some bit of information that was just beyond the normal bit of experience, and we then, instead of saying, wow, you saw something that I wasn't able to see, we said instead, wow, you are insane. You should not trust your thoughts anymore. I bet you that there is no way that makes you more sane. I think that can only make you more insane. Like, think about the coherence of information, the coherence that's required for information, and you're basically telling them, break the coherence of your experience. Don't trust it. And instead of saying, wow, you had an experience that I have not had, so I don't understand it. Instead, we say, no, you're schizophrenic, you're seeing things that aren't there, and you're crazy. Don't trust your thoughts anymore. That sounds like a way to actually make somebody crazy. Because what crazy really is it is thinking something that is unable to be reconciled. Basically, like, if you, let's say when somebody says, oh, I'm a philosopher of consciousness student. I've talked about this story before, where two PhD philosophy students that came into my Discord and told me they were writing their thesis on the fact that consciousness was an illusion. And I was like, who's writing your thesis? It's like, that kind of incoherent thought can make you crazy, because you're basically denying your own existence. To deny free will, same thing. I mean, I don't think when people think free will, they usually think that everything that we do is free will. That's not true. But there is you do have the ability to choose your goals, and that is essentially the beginning of freedom of will, which is your desire to do. And that, but so if you're denying that you have the ability to make any kind of choice in the world, where you're denying that you should trust your firsthand experience, and you should instead trust secondhand sources, that you're going to lead yourself into insanity, I think, or be led into insanity. Like true insanity, if insanity exists. And I actually think that that's far more common today than we think. We just don't even know how common it is. Just because you can function in the workplace and you pay your rent on time does not make you sane. If you're denying your own existence and you think that you should trust secondhand information sources that you read in a textbook above your first person experience, then you're insane. You might pay your rent on time, but that is like, you will decohere eventually. And you won't know it though. That's the thing. You literally will not know it, and neither will anyone else who is also incoherent. I think that is the only thing that really is, if insanity is anything, it's kind of the disappearing of self. It's like the denial of self, and then leading to like the dissolving of self almost. Unless something snaps you back into it because you have some immense feeling that brings you back to realizing you exist. But this idea, I think that we treat schizophrenia wrongly. We diagnose it probably wrongly. Like, information does not come out of nowhere. Like, where would information come from? I'm not saying that we always accurately interpret the information that we perceive. We don't. Many times we misinterpret the information that we perceive, and we get misinformed by it. But that doesn't mean that the information came from nowhere. And I understand they'll say, no, it's not coming from nowhere. It's coming from something in your mind, in your brain, is like causing it. And I'm not saying that there isn't a physical component, but like, there's more to probably schizophrenia than is the common narrative. And also, and I'm not saying this because I'm schizophrenic. I'm not schizophrenic. But I don't know what, I honestly though do believe that like schizophrenia is like you're oftentimes seeing things that most people can't. What that is, I don't know. But I don't think that you're not seeing something. You are. You might misinterpret what you're seeing, but like, you're not seeing something. So if you tell somebody you're seeing things that aren't there, that's not true. No matter what it is that they're seeing, they might misinterpret what they're seeing, but they are seeing something that's there, no matter what it is. And to tell them that it's not, the worst thing that they probably could do is believe you. That will lead you to actually be great, like decohere, probably. And yeah, I mean, I this is what's what he said, what William Hahn said. I've heard myself say it. I've never heard anybody else say it. I'm sure others have said it, but I think he's right.
Humans could no longer, hey, just sit down, have a bowl of soup. Let's not stress about this. He couldn't take a break for lunch, literally.
Okay, I would like to talk to you for so much longer, but I know there's some questions here.
I'm curious what you think about whether you were discussing that the software hardware dichotomy, and in particular, like,
he said like he's more concerned with what if we are, thinking that people are crazy when they're not, essentially. And I think that that's something that we should really think about. Not worry so much about why people go crazy. Just remember that people who are not who are not, what was the word we were using earlier, who are not acting intelligently, don't ever know it. by definition. They never know it. So, humility is very important in everything. Which humility just means honesty with oneself and about oneself. That's it. It doesn't mean like, self-reducing. It means like honesty with oneself and about oneself. If you're very confident, the humble thing is to say, I'm very confident. If you're not very confident, the humble thing to do is to say, I'm not very confident. Okay, to the chat. West Slavic languages have... yes, exactly. Crazy people perceive stuff that can't be understood and go nuts trying to describe it and lose coherence in the process. Yes, that's true. And it's a lot of times because the language is not there. I've noticed this. People send me stuff all the time. They send me number grids and stuff on Instagram, and I can see they're making patterns, like real patterns. They are perceiving symmetry in information, and they're actually perceiving it. I guarantee you, almost guarantee you that like a psychologist would diagnose these people with schizophrenia. I can't tell you what they are, I see that they're seeing something that's there and that they're seeing real information structures. I don't read much into it because I don't have the context that they have. And also, I think that most people are very limited in the linguistic tools that they have to start actually describing this to others. And that is what I think is the main differentiator between my work and others. It's not that my theories, ideas are that different from the CTMU or from observer theory or from, conscious agent theory. Or it's that my terminology is more fundamentally true. That's those inside, outside, separate, and oneness, I think, are necessity to, really coherently building a description even of these concepts that is coherent and doesn't rely too heavily on metaphors that will eventually break down when you start to actually treat them as not metaphors anymore. And so then people either do one of two things. They use words in a way that confuses people because it's different from how we generally understand them, or they make up new words. And then if you're not already in it, then how would you know what they're even talking about? So of course they're gonna not make sense to you if they're using a word. It's like speaking a different language. But even I've experienced that when I sent my abstract, which is on my website, which is I need to renew as soon as the stream is done. It's my abstract to my paper that I'm writing says, sentient singularity theory, asserts that existence is a singularity of sentience that is creating additional sentient singularities within itself. First sentence. I sent it to my family, and a lot of them were like, my dad was like, I don't understand. And I was like, what don't you understand? It's like, it's obvious what I'm saying. Existence is a singularity of sentience creating additional singularities of sentience within itself, or sentient singularities within itself. What's not to get? And I eventually, it took months. I thought I was just like, he's just not even trying. And then I was like, wait, what word is throwing you off? And he was like, singularity. I was like, what do you think singularity means? And he was like black holes and like the Big Bang. I was like, oh no. I'm using singularity to mean singular, like one, like the definition it had prior to being associated with, being a label for the center of a black hole, or being a label for, the initial creation point at the, beginning of the universe. But he just doesn't think about it like that, because he doesn't use the term singularity outside of hearing, people talk about black holes. So he didn't even think about like its actual meaning. Like it's used to be a label for the center of a black hole because of its actual meaning, which is that to describe a structure that is singular. That's one thing. It was that simple. Like the simplest thing in my first sentence threw him off. And then I changed it, and I was like, what? And I changed singularity to being, and I said, sentient being theory asserts that existence is a sentient being that is creating additional sentient beings within itself. And I read it to him and I was like, what does that mean? And he was like, that it's a living thing that we're in, that it's a feeling, self-aware thing. It's sentient. It's conscious. And I was like, exactly. One word change. One word. That's how like much this stuff matters. Like you have to be a stickler with the language, and you have to be very rigorous in trying to be as coherent and as clear as possible. But you also have to start on a linguistic framework that is built for naturally coherent to the model of what you're trying to represent, which is the four primary perspectives. And no other theory has that. There's Carl Friston's work is very similar. He says the free energy principle, these Markov blankets and Markovian dynamics are governed by inside-outside sensing and acting. And that's certainly a four-dimensional more fundamental four-dimensional manifold structure. It's very close to inside-outside separate and oneness, but you're talking about you're already a step beyond perception at that point, and it doesn't incorporate feeling complete, like the foundational context of feeling, because sensing and acting are things that happen to you, or that things that you do to the world, things that happen to the world that you do, and things that happen to you through the world. Sensing versus acting, and inside and outside is how we think about boundaries. But if you're going to have the boundary of self, it's separateness and oneness must be included. So it's a little bit more fundamental. It's not better, it's different in what it's trying to do. I'm not trying to describe the dynamics of a cellular automata. I'm trying, or even I haven't even. It's not even that I've reached the active part of thinking yet in a mental model. I'm just at the level of perception, and that's it. And perception not just of the world through sensing and acting, but perception of the world and perception of self in the world. So all these theories have uses, and their language is probably catered towards a specific goal. But if you're going to get fundamental, then you need a fundamental linguistic foundation to build from. And I think that those are the four primary perspectives. It's not that I'm so smart and I figured it out, guys, and you better believe me. It's like, I think those words are just key, and that you can do it with those, and you can't do it without them. Okay. I know this is a long one, but I loved this conversation that he had. There was so much that is relevant to my work, so I'm going to talk about it. I'll go to the chat first, and then we'll play the next clip. I remember after a psychotic break I had to learn to talk again, basically. Yeah, and if those misunderstandings escalate to frustrations, it can lead to a vicious cycle of miscommunication and frustration. Yeah, with oneself too. You can tell yourself things that are not true, and if you start believing them, you will decohere. Like the idea that I'm meaningless, that's impossible. At least seems to be, according to my work, which seems to imply a logical, inevitable requirement that creation of multiplicity of sentience must have been an intentional action by the eternally existent, inevitable sentience, which is God. Because oneness is the default nature of existence. And so to create multiple existences within one's self, if you are existence, means swimming upstream against your nature, which is always a choice. And it's funny because I think that was probably done for the sake of creating meaning itself, because if sentience is all there is fundamentally, then all that to feel meaningful is to make a fundamental impact. And well, what is fundamental? Sentience. So what do you impact fundamentally? Someone else. That's how you feel like you made a fundamental impact. That's why everybody, wants that. They want meaning in life, which is impact on others. Really, it's not, some people really like Ferraris, but like at the end of the day, that's not going to make you feel meaningful. But if you're on your deathbed and you're like, wow, I really helped those people, and I had those children, and they had those children, and they had those children, and I, lived with my wife for my entire, for decades, and we were there for each other. It's like, that's the stuff that's going to make you feel meaningful. And it's funny, in the Western world, we think that meaningful means like, I'm going to impact the world. But what does that really mean? It doesn't mean impact the world like Earth. It means like impact the people in the world, that the people that are the world. That's really what it means. But English has kind of made us not prioritize personal sentient being relationships. It makes us look at the world as a thing instead of a being. And so, because it's not gendered probably, and so we think about the world as the Earth. How do you impact the Earth? I don't know, maybe start a company. Like, I remember thinking that when I was graduating college. It's like, I just want to have an impact. What does that mean? I don't know, maybe like Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg is not going to care about Facebook on his deathbed. Not very much. He's going to care about his daughters and his wife. That's what he's going to care about. Way more than, oh, I made this giant company that spanned the world except China and North Korea. But that's not that's not gonna fill him with meaning. Even if it's, fulfilling at the time to accomplish something, and it's, materially profitable. But impact on others. And, God was the only one who has ever been meaningless ever. Prior to making anyone else, he was meaningless. As soon as he makes anyone else, he's the most meaningful. But you and I, we're always meaningful because we were made for a reason, for the sake of creating meaning, which means we create meaning to God. God has no meaning without us. Like, he's just a sentient being that is alone and eternal and couldn't kill himself if he tried, and is meaningless prior to making others within himself. But if you think, it's funny because like people who think that they're meaningless, they decohere, they fall apart, they, destroy themselves and others. They go homicidal, suicidal, whatever, self-destructive. And but I think that that's partially that they really truly decohere because it's truly fundamentally untrue. It's not just that it's a useful thought to have, that you are meaningful. It is a true thought. Like, and but we don't think about the world in terms of sentience being fundamental. So, we can't really wrap our heads around that in most mainstream scientific discussions. But theology is really still able to do it. Philosophy has fallen away, but it's starting to realize that it's fallen away, or the narrative at least has started to realize. And which brings us to this clip, which is that where he talks about language as a being itself. Where is it? Let's see. Language. Oh, I don't know where he went. Lang. Let's look. I'm searching my Excel sheet right now for misspelled language. I don't know where it is, but there's a part in this where he says, I think we need to think about language as not just a tool, but as like kind of like a being. And it's just interesting how similar that is to a theological argument. It's like, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It's like the description of creation was creation, and creation was within and part of Creator. That's how I interpret that, at least. It's interesting. But here, chat. I've been labeled as schizophrenic, and trying to return to a coherent state and be able to explain thoughts in a coherent way has been the most difficult thing in my life. Some things you don't have to explain. Some things you can't explain. So some things are just meant for you, and that's okay. And that's what I will say. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to tell you what is the best, but I will tell you what I think would probably be better than telling you that you're crazy, which is that you are seeing something that is there. I don't know what it is. And you don't have to describe it to everybody because they can't see it. And if they can't see it, they're not going to be able to understand it, most likely. So maybe even if you had the perfect words, maybe there are no perfect words. That's a more intelligent way. That is an intelligent way of saying that. Is that not that there are perfect words that still wouldn't work. It's that there are no perfect words to describe. Imagine trying to describe the color red to somebody that's never seen red. You can't. So, and if those misunderstandings escalate to very difficult not to trap yourself in the cycle. That's true for everybody. Bro, what's going on here? You popped up on my FYP. I don't know what FYP is. Feed? Bro, you were literally on here telling people who are schizophrenic that they are seeing real things. I'm saying I don't know what they're seeing. I'm saying that they should trust their experience, that they're perceiving information. That's it. It's up to them to figure out what that information is. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying they're seeing something that is like, that they're seeing a monster that nobody else can see. I don't know what they're seeing. But to say that they should not trust their experience as being an experience is going to lead to madness. I'm not telling them to do anything about it either. So, what am I doing? That's bad. I don't think anything. I really think about that a lot with these streams. It's like, I do not want these streams to be destructive. And it's funny because that'll lead actually to this next clip with that Curt brought up, which is this.
Is that I want to make sure that what I'm doing with this channel is good, or it is not promulgating harm.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's extremely tricky, because even this, it sounds like what you're saying is it's necessary for the creative endeavor to go outside the norm and to allow yourself to indulge in some dosage of madness.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, there is such a thing as madness.
Right.
And that hasn't been separated in this conversation. So I would like you to make that distinction.
What comes to mind is the real scary idea is that those that have gone mad are not wrong. We have this tendency, and I think it's an unfortunate framework, that those that suffer from mental illness are broken somehow. There's a chemical imbalance. Their brain's wired wrong, or they have traumatic experience that sort of messed up their software. But maybe that's not the case at all. Maybe they're sort of astronauts that have been to the moon, and the rest of us just haven't been there. And like you were saying before with your guests, you have to assume that they have this valid experience. And if we imagine that we are software, then all the experiences are real, right? Because they're just virtual machines anyway. So all of our thoughts are made out of just patterns. And so if someone has that experience, it's genuine. It's not a fallacy. It's what they experience, and they by them instantiating it, it's real. And so this idea that the mentally ill aren't broken, but are just at the edge of evolution or the edge of these unthinkable thoughts, is It's something that stirs me.
There could also be misattributions. So for instance, they go to the moon and then they come back and say, I was on a balloon made of cheese. And so we then say there are no balloons made of cheese. However, if they had said and correctly identified there's a rock that orbits the Earth and we never noticed it, you understand what orbits are and so on, then we would be like, oh, that's interesting. Can we go look for that now? And we find it. Now, in this example, it's quite foolish because we see the moon, but you get the idea.
Yeah, I think that's probably the situation that we're in. And that when these people go to these places and they come back and they try to use ordinary word vectors, they try to decompose it and serialize it, and they model in their mind how your mind is going to respond to their experience, and they describe it, it doesn't match. And then we hear words like balloon and cheese, where in their mind, they're thinking about something much richer. But that's sort of the token that they were able to get out. And we say, oh, no, that person is nutty because they're talking about balloons of cheese, and that's not how we think about it. But if we were to go back, millennia and describe the moon in modern terms to the wisest people we could find, they would say that we're nutty. They would say, no, this is the goddess, and this is Luna, and this is how it works, and this is what it means, and so on. And so when we describe it as a collection of rocks in an orbit in a gravitational well, that would sound like balloons and cheese to them.
So part of me is, maybe you felt the same. One of the reasons why I didn't talk about my experience, but I do more and more, but I still rarely do relatively compared to how often I have these podcasts or talk to people, is that I'm ashamed of it. And I also think that I thought that it was much more rare than it was. And as I speak to people, there's some professors, there's the prominent professor of math who I can talk to you about off air. His name is a household name to mathematicians, who told me that I'm so glad you talked about this in the Carl Friston episode because I was experiencing something like this myself.
I think we'll find out it's a much more universal phenomenon. And this immune system concept applies sort of at the cultural level, where we don't share those ideas for fear in some sense, because we know that they can be lethal to relationships, to our standing in society, to our financial well-being, that really exposing that raw self, even though the experiences are genuine and valid, we don't share that. And I think that's kind of what we need to overcome as a culture. If we want to make it to this next era of evolution and humanity, we have to embrace that. We have to embrace that diversity of thought, and people that previously were laughed off the stage, that's precisely where the interesting ideas are going to come from, right? So, we mentioned like with the moon, but if we take anything out of the modern world, whether it's, quantum physics or information theory, or even just the idea of software, and we go back, like we said, 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, these ideas were insane, right? The whole world is just this utterly unimaginable creation compared to what we thought about before. It reminds me of, I've been traveling recently and seeing sort of modern cities up close. And
Guys, I've been saying it. Apparently so has William Hahn, but so have I. This is this is something that our society has as a problem, is that our metaphysical foundations are literally wrong. And if that's the case, you would not want to be judged you would not want your sanity to be judged based on a framework that has at its core incorrect metaphysical assumptions. I said this guy once asked me in Discord, he thought I was crazy because I was talking about sentience, and I used the word God to be the title that I gave to the initial, I think, inevitable, eternal, sentient being that is existence itself. And I use the word God to describe that, to refer to that being. That's my choice. I didn't always do that. I was a self-described atheist until 24 years old. And then this project made me realize that existence is almost certainly a sentient being, a singular sentient being, not scripture or anything like that. And not against those things. I've actually now found wisdom in them after this, realization that started with trying to understand AGI and or technological sentience. See, that's that difference though. That is going to determine how well you can understand what is required for an intelligent technological being to exist, for Skynet to exist. Like your ability to understand what Skynet is might be dependent upon whether or not you call it AGI or whether or not you call it a technological sentience. And I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying it would certainly help to be more accurate in your description. if you're to understand it as well as you can. So, but I remember this guy said to me though, he heard me say something about God, and I, without a degree, said, I think I have a framework that's a fundamental cosmological and mental framework. That's it, I mean, I know that's it, but like, I'm not saying it's the only one that could be made. Maybe you could use other mediums to make basically the same thing, but maybe different models that have different use cases. You don't use Excel, maybe you use sandcastles. I don't know, but something. And, but he asked me, do you believe in the supernatural? And I said, what do you mean by the supernatural? He goes, that's not what I asked. He said, this isn't about me. It's about you. What do you believe in the supernatural? And I said, no, I need to know what you mean by supernatural in order to answer, make sure so that I know I'm answering your question, and he didn't want to answer it because he had no definition for the supernatural. And I knew that. I kind of knew what his definition was. And I said, there's two potential definitions that we could use for the term supernatural. One of them is that which does exist, but is beyond our normal experiences and our normal everyday experience, or that which does not exist. And I was like, which one do you mean? And he refused to answer, because as soon as he answers, my answer is a given at that point. But it's actually the conclusion of the exchange, and we actually learned something more than what he was hoping to learn. He was not hoping to learn anything. He was hoping to say, he was hoping I would say yes, and then he would be like, wow, see, you believe in ghosts and supernatural, and like that you're just crazy. And I just proved it, and I didn't fall for it. And but we need to have a different terminology when it comes to how we describe people and describe things. We should not say geniuses. He's a genius. No, that was genius. She's an idiot. No, that was idiotic. Oh, he's intelligent. No, that what he's doing is intelligent. He's not very intelligent. No, what he's doing is not intelligent. It's incoherent. That's, we should never say anything like they're crazy. It's a bad word, and I'm guilty of using it all the time. But what's funny is I think that the people that are most incoherent in their thinking about, the fundamental nature of the cosmos are probably the most accredited. And but how you even say that matters. You can't just say they're crazy. You have to say they're thinking about the fundamental nature of the cosmos is actually incoherent with the logic of thinking itself. And you say that, they're not going to be like, you're crazy, and like laugh at you. They're going to ban you from their Discord and tell you that you are too convincing and it's a danger. That's what happened to me. And it's like, well, okay, you're not going to be able to convince them just with your models and arguments alone. Like, they're going to have to experience their incoherence and experience coherence, which means they have to be humble enough to challenge themselves truly and assume the opposite of their default assumption for the sake of argument, and truly look for evidence of that. And that's how you think. If you look for evidence of that supports your default assumption, that is not actually thinking. The process of thinking is you assume the opposite of your default assumption is true, and then you look for evidence of that. So if you think the Earth is flat, but somebody else says it's a sphere, in order to try and like truly challenge yourself humbly and honestly, you have to assume it's a sphere and look for evidence that it's a sphere. If you think it's a sphere and somebody else says it's flat and you think it's a sphere, you have to assume it's flat and then look for evidence that it's flat. You can't just look for, I think it's a sphere, I'm going to look for evidence that it's a sphere. you already know that evidence. That's why you have the default opinion that you have. So you have to go look at what you haven't looked at yet, and otherwise you'll get trapped. That is what I mean by like these things are these processes can only happen one way, and if you don't do them in the way that is that they must be done, then you're not doing them at all, and you're going to be incoherent. You're going to be not acting intelligently, or you're not going to be intelligent at that moment. It doesn't destroy your ability to be intelligent about something else, but necessarily, at least initially, but it does, sometimes we are all idiotic, not idiots, but idiotic. Sometimes we are all genius, or sometimes we all have moments of genius. Some people have more moments of genius than others, but it's a moment that all of us have. And it's just a moment of like profound insight that is, kind of perspective shifting in a way that was counter expected, maybe. But that's at least a feeling of what it feels like when you have a moment of genius. And so we need to talk about these things differently. To say he's crazy, he's just schizophrenic, he is just a genius, Ed Whitten, he's a genius, and that guy on the side of the street, he's just schizophrenic, and that guy, over there, is just crazy. You are being incoherent. If I said, oh, you're just actually the crazy one, I'd be just as guilty as they are. But you have to say you're actually being the one being incoherent. But it's tough to be like to speak like that, because it's not what we've been raised with and what we're used to. Like I actually think we should get rid of the word crazy. I don't think it has any true use. I think it's a filler word. Oh, how was yesterday? Oh, this happened. Oh, dude, that's crazy. It's like you just don't. It's like saying, oh, okay. It's like it doesn't add anything. It's just a way of acknowledging the thing the other person said, without saying anything about it, and just kind of saying, oh, I recognize that was important to you. That's why it's crazy. But how do you know somebody's crazy? You can't just say anybody is crazy. Like you really cannot know that without like deep discussion, and knowing them like very well, and because you don't know what they know. So how do you know that what they are saying doesn't have a context that makes it make sense? I mean, we really have it's not our place or our to call anyone else to be dismissive of anybody else's sanity. We can see moments of incoherence in other people, though. That's fine. But like overall, that's God who has the ability to see everything. He understands whether or not that person's truly crazy. And if you're truly lost it, you don't have any sense left, or any coherence left, I don't think you exist anymore. You're just you just might be a body that is operating on instincts and memory, but like you and your agency is probably gone at that point. But I mean, once you die, it probably it's gone. Whereas if you are not that, if that's not your situation, which isn't even the right way to say it, because like that can't be any one situation, because that means like they're already gone, just like a shell of a person that we can't tell that there's no one there anymore. This is just a speculation, by the way. I don't know, but it does have some logic to it. but I don't know that this is how it works. There's some things I'm very confident about. Existence is a singular sentient being. Very, very confident. Other things I'm not very confident about, like, whether or not your soul can dissolve. And we, and you just be this meat bag that nobody realizes that there's nobody home anymore. It's just like, Tesla self-driving for the rest of your meat bag existence. That's just a thought. So just realize that I have a scale in my confidence in some of these things, but it does have some sense to it, that some logic. And but if it's like, selling your soul, it's like giving up your agency. If you give up your agency enough, like, then you just don't have it. Like, how could you keep it and not have it anymore? I don't know how that works. You either have it or you don't. And it's, I don't know. Like, I don't know what the trigger would be that would be like, now you're no longer, Sam Harris is no longer actually a sentient being. He's just a meatbag, because he thought that, he thought his consciousness out of existence. I'm not saying that he's done that. I'm just saying, like, seems coherent with his assumption about his own free will or agency. But yeah, I'm just picking on him. But yeah, it's like, it's not up to us to know. We can't know whether or not somebody knows things that we don't. By definition, how could you know? So it's not your place or my place to judge who understands, and who doesn't in general. I guess you need to see a specific situation to make a judgment, which is like, it's like the whole, like, love the sinner, hate the sin thing. It's like, the things we are meant to judge are actions. We have to make judgments. People make this mistake where they say we have to judge people, or we have to judge, which usually leads to we have to judge people, or we have to not judge anything at all. It's like, no. You are meant to judge things, not meant to judge people. Whereas people get it most of the time, we get it backwards because of instincts and imperfection. But we judge people, and we either judge people and things, or we don't judge people or things. It's like, you need to judge actions and not people. Actions give you context. You can't judge the context of the entire context of somebody's life. It's just impossible, unless you are them. Curt talks about here, though, how does he, like, try and prepare for his streams, which I have always wondered, because he seems to know so much about these people's work, and I mean, it's amazing that how much work that seems like that must take. But I mean, it's also his job, so that makes sense. But he said, I prepare until I can seem to be able to emulate them, like, be able to predict kind of what they would say. And that is that's probably as close as you can get. But you'll never be able to completely emulate somebody, obviously. But, like, if you're going to try and prepare to interview somebody, or trying to understand them, being able to emulate them is probably meaning, like, predict what they would think about something that you haven't heard them give a statement on yet. That means, like, you have a degree of understanding the context that they're incorporating into their thinking. That's how you would judge that. It's like, can I predict what they would think about this, having not heard them give their thoughts about this yet? It's fascinating. I am hoping to do some interviews on here, but more like discussions. I was thinking about how would I prepare for that. I think it's going to be different than that, though. I think that there's just, because I have my own theory, which I just honestly like, there's so much just, I don't know, stigma associated with that statement, but because of that, like it just changes their dynamic with how you, it's not like I could have Chris Langan on and just talk to him as somebody interviewing Chris Langan. It's like now to have him on is to have a discussion about my work and its relationship with his. It's not a challenge. It just necessarily, people oftentimes default assume that would be the case, but that should not actually be the case usually. But it just changes the dynamic, and I've definitely realized that. Plus, like, why, would want it to be different from what other people do? Because everybody should try and do something a little bit different than what other people do. It's like, I shouldn't try and interview people the way that Curt interviews people, or try and interview people the way that Lex interviews people. It's like, they get those answers from them. I don't need to get those answers from them. Each of one of them is different too, by the way, obviously. One of them is very, mathematically and I guess scientifically rigorous. I would say the other one is more like, I don't know what the other one is. I don't listen to Lex enough anymore, but I mean, certainly Curt is more like logically, philosophically, mathematically rigorous. But I'm totally sidetracked. I have thought about like I want to have more discussions with people, but it's hard when you have your own work, because everything is it's like, if I go on with it, it's kind of assumed if I go on and talk to that guy publicly, it's kind of with me or with anybody that has a piece of work. You can't just have a discussion with them. To have a discussion with them is to endorse their work as not as correct, but as serious to some degree, like it's not even to endorse it as serious. It's to dismiss it as, it's to give some level of like respect to that person, which kind of in turn gives some level of respect to their work if they are working on a specific model like I am. So it changes just how I interact with people. I have thought about like, how do I have more live discussions with people instead of just having commentaries? But it also, I think, makes it just more dynamics involved and considerations for people who would potentially come and talk to me publicly, or people on my channel, and also people who would, whenever I guess just more considerations on their part. I don't really, anybody that I would invite on here, I respect enough to like have a public discussion with. But they're usually people who are more accredited than me anyway. So it's just interesting, like, to think about, how would you prepare? It's like it would take a different level of preparation, because it would be preparing something else. It's like it's not an interview about somebody's work. It would be like, how do I have a good discussion with them that is fruitful for everyone? Like, how do we add to each other, like, understanding? But the thing is like, if that requires like if you're not accredited, it's tough I can't even say it's tough, because I haven't really tried, but I feel like there would be more people would have more consideration before they came on here. But I am telling you guys, with all of this that I just said, I hope this year I have a toddler, and I can't control her very well yet. But I hope that I can have more like face-to-face, aka like digital discussions with people who are also working on this stuff, instead of just giving commentary. But to bring all this back, true, like, total side tangent, but it's something that's been on my mind. I've told you guys before, I want to have more like discussions with people, actual discussions. And so when Curt talked about how does he prepare for his discussions, it made me think about how would I have to do that. I don't know yet. I don't have the answer. But maybe you just have to try it. But I um, it's interesting though what he said when he talks about his experience of like feeling like he went insane, um, or that he was going insane, kind of. I think that's basically what he said, because he was having he just had a very frightening experience where he was struggling, I guess, with reconciling or recognizing whether or not he was sane or not. I don't want to put words in his mouth. I think I showed the clip, but he's talked about it on many streams before a little bit, and it's because he said that it's because he goes and he has to truly like try and understand people's work well enough to where he could predict what they would think about something that he hasn't heard them talk about, which means assuming that their assumptions are true enough to build coherence within the assumptions that assertions that they're making with that are key to their work. And that's what I'm saying is, like, if you're going to truly actually investigate something, you have to do that. You have to if you want to know whether or not the Earth is truly a sphere and you think it's a sphere, then you actually have to assume it's flat and look for evidence that it's flat. Like, you have to actually do that. And if you're going to try and investigate honestly somebody's metaphysical model or cosmological model or consciousness model or physics model, you or Tao Shaun, theory of everything, you have to assume that their theory is correct, essentially, for the sake of, and build coherence within it, at least look for coherence within it. And if you're doing that, the different piece of work every week, like, that would be, I don't know what that would be like. I've never done that, because even though I look at everybody else's work all the time now, I didn't do that until after I had built all my models. Like, I didn't look at Carl Friston's free energy principle and be like, inside, outside, sensing and acting. That's close, but I think I'm going to change it. No, I had already come up with inside, outside, separate, and oneness like years before I heard Carl Friston say inside, outside, sensing and acting. So when I think about, when I look at other people's work, it's different, because I have to assume that the parts of my work that I'm most confident on, at least, because I've checked myself again and again and again, and the same way that I just described that you have to, where you assume that you're false and look for evidence of it, or you assume the opposite. You don't assume that you're false. You assume the opposite of what your default assumption is. You assume that the opposite of your default assumption is true, and then you look for evidence of it. Because remember, it's non-zero. It's zero and non-zero. There's no true and false. It's true and zero. And so you assume that it's true and you look for evidence of it. I'd already made my core models of my work, and am extremely confident in the basic assertion of my theory, which is about the nature of existence being a singular sentient being making additional sentient beings within it. Like, I'm not saying there aren't issues with some like, I don't know, maybe it's not molecule in between cell and atom. Maybe molecule and atom are one and the same and should be one level, and then I'm missing one. Something like that could totally be the case. But like, my general core defining aspects of my work, I'm confident on. So I was already confident in them because I experienced them as I built it. I didn't have an assumption and then try and build arguments for it. I was trying to understand whether or not AI was going to become a tyrant, not build a cosmological framework. So by the time I heard everybody else's model, I was already confident in the core of mine. So I've never struggled with, like, oh, I'm losing, like, what is true. I've not had that. It would be tough to have that. I don't know even if it would be tough. I don't know what it would be like. I mean, I'm assuming it would be tough because Curt said it was tough, and I believe him. But I'm trying to think, how would you, you know, I think that the thing that you have to remember through all of this, through any, if you're going to, if you're going to try and research, this goes for the audience because like most of you don't have like a metaphysical theory that you've been working on for years. Even some of you might, but like most of you probably don't. You just listen to other people who do. And it's like, if you're going to do that, I would say the most important thing always to do, and this is true for anything. This is true when you're trying to understand, when you're looking into different political, ideologies or economic ideologies or, I don't know, medical possibilities. Like, you should remember what is the truest thing that you know, which is that you are. And then think about what that means about you and about what you must assume about the world, not necessarily what that means about the world, because that's not even exactly the right way to think about it. It's that what that means for what you must assume about the world, given, what is, to make it coherent with what is the truest thing that you know. Like, that is what is important to remember. If you're going to look into these different religions, if you're going to like look into different religions, always remember that. Like, that is, and also the last thing I would say when it comes to like really looking into different ways of living, or the things that could have an impact on, or implications on how you should live, is like, we just judge things by their fruit. If something is generative, it's good. If something is not generative, and it's not probably a good thing. So, something leads to like family. You don't have to be like a religious person to realize that like family is intuitively like a good thing, and like, commitment and children and like things like that. And like, those are good. Peace, kindness. But if something leads to like aggression and hostility and immodesty and I don't know, just things that aren't fruitful, probably should avoid it. But see if there's anything left, and then we'll probably wrap up. Any final questions, put them in the chat. If you like this, if you enjoyed it, if you found it valuable, please hit the like button. If you did not find it valuable, please tell me why in the comments below. Yeah, I think that's it. This was a great stream. I hope, let me know what you think. I really appreciate Curt and William Hahn having this discussion and releasing it. I think that these are great discussions. And I mean, it's funny. I was talking to my wife and I was like, basically William said, he said, if you took somebody from 200 years ago and you dropped them into like Beijing today, they would probably think there was thousands of years in the future, not 200. And he's like, well, I think the next 25 years are going to kind of be exponential, not, what we think of as 25 years. There's going to be some exponential changes. I think that that's true for some things. But I also think that there's some things that if we don't, and this really what it depends on is like, everybody thought we'd have flying cars and we'd be, wiser and just like, I don't know. There were a lot of things that were assumed about the future that don't seem to be the case if you look at it from the perspective of, 50 to 100 years ago. But there are some things that nobody anticipated really, like the internet. Nobody has flying cars, but everybody has access to the Library of Alexandria in their pocket. When I was in third grade, I remember going to my teacher, Mrs. Chan. I was like, Mrs. Chan, how come nobody makes a camera that is also a phone, that is also a pager, that is also, like, I don't know what else, like a video camera? And she looked at me and she was like, because if you do that, then you'll have something that's a really bad camera and a really bad phone and a really bad pager and a really bad video camera. And I was like, okay, well, so much for that. You know, how many times were you told you were not going to have a calculator in your pocket? Always. Come on. You have ChatGPT in your pocket, which is a voice activated calculator, and also like essay writer. Like, imagine going back in 15 years ago and being like, you will have a calculator in your pocket, and you will also have an essay writer in your pocket, and a project maker in your pocket, and a songwriter in your pocket, like, and a script writer in your pocket, and a business plan writer in your pocket, and it will write any of these things in 30 seconds max, anytime you need. They'd be like, no. I think these AI programs are going to change the world the way that the cell phone kind of has, because they are going to democratize computation, not just computation, but coding. Like computers, like laptops, personal computers, PCs, and phones have democratized the ability to have, to do large calculations. For anybody to do large calculations, that used to be, you need somebody who that was their full-time job to do that. Their job was the computer. I think AI is going to be like your full-time coder and creative. Like, you will have like graphic designer, songwriter in your pocket at all times. Movie maker. Like, that's going to change the world so dramatically. I don't even understand. I don't even know how it's going to change the world yet. It's overwhelming to think about. But I think if we don't change our metaphysical assumptions about the nature of the universe, I actually think our physical sciences are just going to stay completely stagnant, where they're not going to get that much better. Just like they haven't gotten that much better in the last 50 years either. They're not that, our planes are slower than they used to be. Obviously that's money reasons for that, but still, like, they made the SR-71 Blackbird on like slide rules, guys. That's amazing. I don't think anybody could do that today. But at the same time, like, we haven't moved much past that either. And I think that part of that is because our metaphysical foundations are just so wrong. I think we'll have the same political arguments about capitalism versus communism, and, which is, I think, just a ridiculous argument. I'm not saying that there are differences in governments and those differences should not be discussed. I'm just saying that I think we focus on the wrong differences. There's a market and a commonwealth in any nation. I think that there are things that we're going to see truly different and profound. But I also think that we need to get like some core changes in how we discuss and how we think about and how we feel about the world and about each other, or else we won't make it. Will impact our technological and political progress for sure. But thankfully, these conversations are being had on channels like Theories of Everything with Curt Jaimungal by William Hahn and others, and I appreciate it. There are many other channels that are also doing it that are mostly smaller but still having great talks. We talk about them on here. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe, and I have a link to my website, which I will get back up and running within 10 minutes of ending the stream. I have a link to other social platforms. I have a link to Patreon. I have a link to my Substack also below, and I've started releasing more of my writings on Substack, and I will be doing that more. That's my goal. One of my goals for this year is to do a lot more writing. But thank you, everyone. Peace.